Chapter 135. Su Fengnian carried them to the stream bank and placed them in the water. The two cubs sank into the clear water and played in the water as if they were walking on flat ground, creating countless splashes. When they were a little further away from the stream bank, the smaller sister, King Kong, seemed to not see Su Fengnian. She opened her mouth and bit her younger brother. The two cubs floated out of the water and rushed towards Su Fengnian, who was sitting on the bank. In the end, they almost stepped on the water and jumped into His Royal Highness's arms. Su Fengnian almost fell backward. His chest ached, but he didn't care. Ignoring the cub's natural armor and thorns, he reached out and touched the two naughty guys who were close to him. Su Fengnian smiled brightly. Ningame didn't know the inside story. He only felt that the cubs looked strange and didn't seem ordinary. Shu Xiu whispered to Yang Qingfeng beside her, "Surnamed Yang, what are these cubs called?" Yang Qingfeng was indifferent and stood there like a piece of wood. Shu Xiu charmingly curled her lips and said, "Stingy." Yang Qingfeng just looked at the back of His Royal Highness who was playing with the young Kuei by the stream bank. She didn't understand why she wasted the precious corpse of the mother Kuei. Shu Xiu subconsciously murmured, "His Royal Highness, I always felt that he was more friendly to some inconspicuous people and things. To us, it's not even as good as his mount." Hearing this, Yang Qingfeng sneered and said, "That's only to you." Shu Xian recalled how His Highness the Crown Prince had called her Auntie Shu, and how His Highness the Crown Prince had repeatedly said that he wanted to send her out of the dilapidated Taoist temple and Qingyang Palace. She was so angry that she wanted to kill someone. However, her heart was filled with anger and resentment, but her face was as charming as a flower. She smiled with a hidden dagger and said, "I don't know who it was that was frightened by His Highness the Crown Prince's gaze just now." Yang Qingfeng crossed her snow-white fingers in front of her chest. Shu Xiu sneered, "Yang Qingfeng, if you have the ability to make a move, I guarantee that I won't fight back and will let you do whatever you want." Yang Qingfeng was angry, but she didn't make a move. She only said calmly, "Sister? No wonder His Royal Highness addressed you as Aunt Shu. Auntie Shu is already so old, Yang Qingfeng has no interest in taking advantage of her. He must be picky, especially His Royal Highness." When Shu Xiu was angry, she could always make people not look at her angry face, but at the sight of her chest trembling slightly. Young Kuei could already walk unsteadily. Although he would fall when he ran too fast around Su Fengnian, he was still safe and sound even if he fell and kicked up dust. He stood up shakily and was still as lively and active as before. When Su Fengnian saw Ningame and Lu Qiantang walking over, he stood up and brought the siblings who were playing behind him back to the caravan. Jiang and I, who was sitting beside Bluebird, was stunned when he saw the two lively little guys. The old god of swords heard the noise of the young Kuei and lifted the curtain to take a look. He said in surprise, "The spiritual energy is so rich that it can be compared to the black tiger who listened to Qi Xuanzhen's lectures for more than 10 years. Su Fengnian carried the young Kuei by the neck and entered the carriage. He didn't see Yu Wei. She probably didn't want to see him, so she ran to Jiang and I and Old Man Li to sulk. Su Fengnian took off the embroidered winter and spring thunderblades and sat down cross-legged. The two young Kuei used their small heads to nudge his calves. Su Fengnian patted them twice. When they raised their heads in puzzlement, Su Fengnian pointed at the two little guys and smiled. "You are called Bodhisattva, you are the elder sister. You are called Jin Gang, you are the younger brother. Let me explain again, my name is Su Fengnian, I am not your father. Alright, I'm going to practice the De Huang Ting. Don't make trouble, otherwise I will hang you up and beat you." It was strange to say that the young Kuei who was making a fuss quieted down after Su Fengnian sat down to practice. It curled up at Su Fengnian's feet and didn't move. If the male Kuei who was born later than it could only be the younger brother moved, it would be bitten by its sister who was actually smaller than it in size. It didn't dare to fight back. It was taboo to be distracted during practice. But for some reason, Su Fengnian thought of this pair of siblings and the young Kuei so much that the corners of his mouth curled up. He couldn't concentrate on his breathing, but the flow of qi in his body was smoother than usual. Su Fengnian couldn't help but think of the words he said while riding behind the waterfall on the mountain. "The Taishang Wang Qing is not emotionless. Wang Qing is silent and not emotional. It is like forgetting. If you remember, it is true love. As the saying goes, the speaker cares. If he is pleased and forgets to say something, the Tao is not the Tao. If you know by chance and want to say something but stop, then you know it. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and scolded with a smile. What Xin Kong Dao? You always like to speak ambiguously and inexplicably. Bull Rider, if you are really the Zhenwu Great Emperor, go down to Wudong if you have the ability. If this is too difficult for you, then get lost to Jiangnan. Su Fengnian stopped smiling and muttered to himself, is it harder to meet a woman than to become the number one in the world with 2 Daos on his shoulders? The 2 ancestral courts faced each other. 600 years ago, the dragon and tiger were prosperous. Wudong Mountain was almost wiped out and most of the Taoists fled down the mountain. 300 years ago, Wudong suppressed the dragon and tiger. The dragon and tiger lowered their heads to the lowest point. In the past 100 years, the dynasty had raised the dragon and tiger again and again. Wudong was worse with each generation. Even Wang Zhonglo and the previous sect masters had never entered the capital to meet the emperor. The next 100 years? Very few people really thought that the black tortoise would rise for 500 years. In this battle between the north and the south that had been secretly fighting for a whole 1,000 years, who would emerge victorious? Or would it be the little celestial master surnamed Qi, who was known to have the best comprehension ability and the best progress in martial arts on Mount Longhu, who had a chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with Qi Xuanzhen in terms of cultivation? Su Fengnian really did not understand Hong Xixiang's Tao. Compared to winning against the Dragon and Tiger Mountain where the 4 great divine masters ruled and produced generations of talents, wasn't it easier to go down the mountain to Jiangnan? Su Fengnian lowered his head and said bitterly, I won't know your Tao in this lifetime. If you don't say it, if you don't do it, how would my big sister know? You just hide on Wudong Mountain and ride a bull. You know my ass. Chapter 136. Wudong Mountain's headmaster, Wang Zhonglo, passed away at Little Lotus Peak. As this news spread from Bailiang to the east, west, and west, the world's Taoist sects were in an uproar. Didn't they say that they could break the Kanglan with 1 finger? Didn't they say that they had just cultivated the Great Yellow Court? How could they say that they had ascended to immortality? It should be known that this ascension to immortality was not like Mount Longhu's Tao, but death. They died of illness and old age like ordinary people, and Wudong Mountain did not hide this at all. At the same time, when the world learned of Wang Zhonglo's death, the headmaster of Wudong Mountain was not Qin Yao, who was second only to Wang Zhonglo, nor was it the oldest standing master Song Jiming, nor was it the mute Wang Xiaoping with outstanding swordsmanship. Instead, it was the young Wudong martial granduncle, Hong Xixiang, who was not even 30 years old. Who was Hong Xixiang? Even many Bailiang pilgrims did not know his name. At most, they only knew that this junior brother, who was highly regarded by Wang Zhonglo, did not have much ambition. He only did trivial things like riding a bull to relieve boredom, studying the meaning of the classics, and building a furnace to refine pills. Occasionally, scholars and literary heroes would climb the mountain to write poems, or high-ranking officials and dignitaries would climb the mountain to burn incense, but they did not see the figure of this young Taoist. On the tortoise camel tablet on Little Lotus Peak, a young and elegant Taoist who grew up on this peak had changed his attire. He wore white socks and a red sandalwood Taoist hairpin with a taiji pattern engraved at the end. The wide and long-sleeved Taoist robe on his body was exceptionally new and noble. There were 2 sword-shaped long belts sewn at the buttons of the Taoist robe. This was a unique decoration of Wudong. 600 years ago, the great Taoist master Lu Dongxian rode a crane to Wudong and used the great way of the sword to create the 2 Taoist robes of Wudong, which symbolized cutting off worries and severing the mortal roots. For Wudong, after Lu Dongxian, who was number 1 in the way of the sword and the way of the heavens, ascended, each generation began to deteriorate. Especially in the last 100 years, there was no longer the majestic atmosphere of the ancestral court. The young Taoist gently leaped onto the tortoise camel tablet and looked at the stairs of the divine path shrouded in clouds. When he was young, he was thin and sallow, and his legs were weak. Wudong was full of snow and the stone steps were piled with thick snow. The Taoist priests did not have time to sweep the snow, so he was carried by his old master. It was said that Big Senior Brother waited for a day and a night under the black tortoise Dongxing's memorial arch. When he went up the mountain, he stole a few glances at Big Senior Brother. Every time, Big Senior Brother would greet him with a smile, like a well-off neighbor's stove that was just warm but not hot. He clearly remembered that at that time, Big Senior Brother only had white hair. When he grew up, he quietly had a head full of silver hair like his master. Big Senior Brother really did not look like a Wudong sect leader. He chopped firewood, made fire, pickled vegetables, cooked, built houses, swept snow, and did everything. His good temper was learned from Big Senior Brother, so Big Senior Brother said that he was Wudong's hope for the next 100 years. Although he was timid, he did not run away. He learned moral precepts with Second Senior Brother Chen Yi, consulted Third Senior Brother Song Jiming on the theory of the pill cauldron, studied the Jade Pillar Heart Sutra with Fourth Senior Brother, and watched Fifth Senior Brother practice the sword. As for what the way of the heavens was, Senior Brothers could not figure it out, so he was not in a hurry. He always felt that as long as he stayed on the mountain, one day he would understand it. When he was 14 years old, he was riding an ox and saw a red dress. He could not forget it and delayed his studies. Big Senior Brother did not scold him. Later, when he saw her again, she said that she was going to Jiangnan and they would not meet again. He gathered his courage and said that he was going down the mountain. Big Senior Brother asked him if he was coming back. He did not say because he never lied. But Big Senior Brother still did not get angry. He only said, "Little Junior Brother, wait for a while. When Big Senior Brother finished cultivating the Great Yellow Courtyard, you can go down the mountain." Back then, Master only allowed you to go down the mountain when you became number 1 in the world. That was a lie. A young man at such an age, always staying on the mountain with a bunch of old men was indeed unreasonable. Later, he patiently waited for Big Senior Brother to finish cultivating the Great Yellow Courtyard. But when he came out of seclusion, he shrank back. Every time he went to the Black Tortoise Will Prosper, he looked up at the 4 big words written by Lu Dongxian with a sword and silently turned to go up the mountain. In the end, Big Senior Brother gave up his Great Yellow Courtyard. Knowing that he was going to die, he rubbed his head at the edge of the cliff of Little Lotus Peak. He smiled and said that it was better for Second Junior Brother to be the chief. Go down the mountain. If you don't go, Big Senior Brother will kick you down. What Black Tortoise will prosper? Let nature take its course. Big Senior Brother only understood one thing when he was about to die. The sky is not high, but the human heart is higher than the sky. The Tao is not high, but the human heart is higher than the Tao. Cultivation is nothing more than cultivation of the heart. Second Senior Brother Chen Yao had unknowingly arrived at the peak. He laughed softly and said, "Chief, if you read the forbidden book in the future, you should do it openly." Standing on the tortoise camel tablet, the new Wudong chief turned around and squatted down. He asked with a bitter face, "Second Senior Brother, Big Senior Brother originally wanted you to be the chief. Are you angry with me?" The old Taoist Chen Yao laughed and said, "You want me to be the chief of Wudong? Big Senior Brother can think of that. It's obvious that you can't beat the 4 celestial masters of Mount Longhu in a fight, and you can't beat that Mr. White Lotus in a quarrel. Isn't this a disgrace to Wudong? Don't talk about me. Go ask Song Jiming and Yu Xingrui, who would be willing to be the chief. If you say this to 5th Junior Brother, let's see if your little Senior Brother Wang won't chop you with his sword." Squatting on the tablet, Little Junior Brother rubbed his cheeks and sighed, "Second Senior Brother, I don't think I'm very good at fighting." Chen Yao, who had always been serious, joked, "Master said that the 5 of us together can't compare to you. Besides, our Wudong doesn't want to fight with others. Whether it's the imperial tutor or the feather-clothed minister, Wudong has never been interested in this since we established the ancestral court. For 1,000 years, Mount Longhu has been racking their brains to go to the capital, but we have refused to go to the capital every time. Ancestor Lu Dongxian has long made it clear that the place with the most vulgar yin qi in the world is the imperial palace, and we can't go there. Although the incense on the mountain is pitiful now, no one will starve to death. The mountains are clear and the water is beautiful, and everyone is blind. When those little Taoists see you, Martial Granduncle, Some even have to call you Great Marshal Granduncle, but when are they afraid of you? They just respect you. Who wouldn't be willing to help you herd cows? This can't be seen on Mount Longhu. The Celestial Master Residence is the Celestial Master Residence, and Mount Longhu is Mount Longhu. They are clearly separated, and they are not as harmonious as our Wudong Mountain. Eldest senior brother said in private that the principle at the foot of the mountain is that amiability breeds wealth. On the mountain, amiability breeds Tao. I think eldest senior brother's cultivation is high, but he can't beat me in reasoning since we were young. But I think this sentence is reasonable. The young chief said worriedly, I wonder how little senior brother Wang's Tao of the sword is going? Don't go to Wu family's sword tomb or Mount Longhu to fight. Sigh, little senior brother Wang's sword doesn't seek sword moves, but divine intent. Chen Yao comforted, fifth junior brother's Tao of the sword is the best on the mountain. He can't save people as well as eldest senior brother, but he's more powerful than eldest senior brother. Before he left, you gave him the deed of thorough comprehension. I believe that as long as fifth junior brother is willing to put in some effort, it will be greatly beneficial. Hong Xixiang, who was no longer called Marshal Granduncle by the younger Taoists of Mount Wudong, said awkwardly, my deed of thorough comprehension was written blindly. At this moment, the dusk drums sounded in the mountain. The fog dispersed, and the scenery of the big and small Lotus Peak could be seen. Hong Xixiang stood up and looked into the distance. He was lost in thought. Qin Yao smiled and said, what's the harm in calling you chief? Are you no longer our little junior brother? So what if eldest senior brother passed away? Is Mount Wudong going to collapse? So what if Black Tortoise won't rise for 500 years? Are you no longer Hong Xixiang? When Shifu brought you up the mountain, he naturally had the idea that you would shoulder the burden of Mount Wudong's prosperity. But more than that, he just wanted you to be free and unfettered. Eldest senior brother was even more so. Little junior brother has been riding an ox these past few years, with books hanging from its horns, carefree like an immortal. We old fellows are envious. One divination a day, each time with a frown on his face, we secretly look at it with joy. So whether we go down the mountain or not, we don't care. Chen Yao's rules, Song Jiming's pill cauldron, Yu Xingrui's jade pillar, Wang Xiaoping's sword intent. There was also eldest senior brother's martial arts and cultivation. After passing the Black Tortoise Dang Xing Memorial Arch, everyone on the mountain went on blind dates. This was Hong Xixiang's home. Riding an ox to read books, refining pills to relieve boredom, 8 steps to overtake cicada only for the spider web. The mountain peak moved with the astral wind, just to see the scenery outside the mountain clearly. Feeding and talking to yellow cranes, just to find it fun. This was his Tao. I don't seek Tao, Tao will come naturally. The youngest chief in Mount Wudong's history didn't say anything. He just let out a long breath. He took a step. This step covered a distance of 10 feet. He directly stepped out of the Tortoise Camel Tablet and stepped out of Little Lotus Peak. Mount Wudong's 72 peaks. The clouds and mist of the 72 peaks rolled and surged towards the small lotus. Hong Xixiang stepped on the back of a yellow crane and rose into the blue sky. Chen Yao raised his head and looked at the strange scene. He muttered, Shifu, eldest senior brother, you should really take a look. Little junior brother has stepped into heavenly phenomenon. Chapter 137. After leaving Mount Qingqing, Su Fengyan hired 4 large boats to sail down the Swallow River. This river was extremely turbulent, with tall mountains on both sides and steep cliffs. The narrowest part of the river was no more than 500 feet. It was only second to the Kuei Gate Pass, where a Taoist saint rode a green ox. This section of the river was filled with small gorges, and large gorges surrounded small gorges. Su Fengyan was wearing a white robe. He stood at the head of the boat and smiled at Yu Yue, who was holding Wu Meinyang. We just passed by the Book Beach and the Sword Beach, where the founder of Wudong, Lu Dongxian, kept the heavenly book and the ancient sword. Don't think that it's dangerous. The Dongling Gorge is the most dangerous place. Our 4 boats are already the limit. If we get any bigger, no matter how familiar the boatmen are with the river, they will all sink. Back then old Huang and I were scared half to death. I even got seasick and vomited all over old Huang. That's why the fishermen here all say that the Book Beach and the Sword Beach are not really beaches, and the Dongling Gorge is the gate of hell. Later, the boat will shake violently. Don't stand here. Yu Wei looked at the scene in front of her and her face turned pale. Just as she was about to turn around, she widened her eyes. She saw a small boat sailing against the current. It was heading straight for the leading boat, which was guarded by the halberd Ningame. A young man in a green robe who looked like a scholar was holding a bamboo pole. He held the pole with both hands and stabbed it into the water. The back of the boat under his feet tilted up. At the same time, the bamboo pole under the boat was lifted up by the handsome man. A dark green bamboo pole bent in a half-moon arc. On the other side, the boat was still standing. On the other side, the boat was flipped upside down by the bamboo pole. Was this green-robed man the Dragon King? The boatmen on the other 3 boats were scared out of their wits. The pole on the river shocked the world and made ghosts and gods cry. The boat under the green-robed man's feet smashed back into the water and drifted away. Su Fengyan widened his eyes and said to himself, "This skill is too overbearing." When they reached Xiong province, they were not far from the capital. The 6 kings of the imperial family all had their own fiefs. Except for the Duke of Huainan Zhao Ying, who hated war since he was young, the other 5 kings all had varying military power. King of Jing and Zhao Heng, Zhao Sui, Zhao Ao, and Zhao. The king was king and of his army. Back when General Gu Jiantang was summoned to the capital, he took off his armor and entered the capital alone. Most of his old subordinates were in the hands of these 2 powerful kings. The smoke of the spring and autumn war had yet to disperse, and the world had just settled down. It was a wise move to have the princes of the imperial clan take control of the country. No one in the dynasty had any objections to this. Only Su Xiao, who was given the title of king with a different surname, had attracted criticism from the court. Back then, other than Gu Jiantang, who was expected to be stationed at the border, the civil officials and strategists wanted the king of Yen, who was not inferior to Su Xiao, to move to Bailiang. But in the end, neither Gu Jiantang nor the king of Yen were able to lead their troops to the north. For example, Zhao Ying, the Duke of Huainan in Xiongzhou, and Zhao Sui, the Duke of Jiaodong in Liaoliao. For these 2 vassal kings, the imperial family was often punished, and many of their sons and grandsons were demoted to commoners. For example, the Duke of Xianxia, according to the rules of the imperial family, he was not allowed to enter the capital. Even after the late emperor passed away, the current emperor refused to allow the Duke of Xianxia to enter the capital. It was rumored that the Duke of Xianxia prayed to the north, so much so that he vomited blood and fainted. He was bedridden for several months, and his filial piety made the northern scholars, who originally had a bad impression of this arrogant and ruthless Duke of Xianxia, regret. In Magu city of Xiong province, the prefecture overseer, governor, and a group of civil and military officials were all 30 li away from the city. It was a huge formation, just to welcome a person who was passing by Xiong province. The king of Huainan, Lu Ying, did not leave the city. According to the imperial clan and vassal laws, the princes of the imperial clan were not allowed to leave their fief without permission. Even if they went out of the city to visit the tombs of the province or went out of the city for a spring and autumn hunt, they had to submit a memorial to the prefecture overseer of the capital on behalf of the king of Yen before they could leave. Otherwise, the officials of the province would be heavily implicated. The king of Jiaodong had once tried to test the law, causing the prefecture overseer of Jinzhou to be removed from his position. The governor and other military officials were transferred away from Liao province, and their official ranks were demoted by 2 levels and sent to the border of the southern kingdom, under the jurisdiction of the king of Yen. The first article of the imperial clan and vassal laws was that the 2 princes were not allowed to meet. The king of Huainan, Lu Ying, was known for his adherence to the rules. He did not dare to cross the line of the imperial clan. Occasionally, his descendants would be punished for violating the rules, but the cultured and refined king of Huainan would not say anything. Fortune and misfortune came hand in hand. Lu Ying became the prince of the imperial clan who went to the capital to meet the emperor the most, and was rewarded generously. Dozens of Bailiang's lackeys, who were once famous in the Jianghu, surrounded a carriage. Among them, there was Fan Zhenhai, who had beheaded the lord of the Forbidden Villa with one strike. There was also Han Laoshan, the junior brother of the older generation's martial Dao grandmaster, spear fairy Wang Xiu. There was also the one-eyed dragon, Yang Chunting, who was known to be able to defeat all Vajra realm masters. The 300 heavily armored cavalrymen galloped like thunder. The prefecture overseer of Xiong province, Yao Baifeng, and everyone else bowed in reverence. The curtain was not lifted, and no one walked out of the carriage. Only a hoarse voice was heard, "Enter the city." Unexpectedly, no one dared to show the slightest bit of anger. One had to know that Yao Baifeng was the leading figure of the scholars of the 3 northern states, and he was also the head of the Yao clan of Xiong province. Back when Grand Secretary Zhang Julu was still in the Dehuang sect, he had consulted prefecture overseer Yao many times. The Yao clan had a total of 5 generations, and they were all second to none in Confucianism. The Yao clan's 5 heroes, from the first to propose the virtue of being informed, to the understanding of things, and then to the reasoning of things, were of the same origin. Together with the Zhu school's Confucianism of the Shangyin Academy in the south, they were known as the 2 champions of assisting the nation. The north and the south complemented each other, and they had always been favored and highly regarded by successive generations of emperors. Yao Baifeng had devoted his entire life to developing his family's studies into national studies, and his students were all over the world. With such a transcendent status, he still lowered his head to the martial artist in the carriage who didn't even bother to show his face. It was no wonder that Confucianism had no backbone. More than half of the world's top 10 noble families had been eliminated by this butcher. Who wouldn't be afraid? What's more, at the advanced age of 60, he took in a concubine. The scholars of Confucianism only treated it as a moral essay and received a favorable comment from Yen Ryu. However, Butcher bluntly scolded him for being old and frivolous. After Master Yao heard this, she was so angry that she closed her door and refused to receive visitors for half a year. It was only when her students persuaded her that she began to lecture again. In Magu City, the Duke of Huainan, Lu Ying, was barefoot and his hair was untidy. His hair was messy and draped over his shoulders. He drove away the servants and stood alone in the small pavilion, drunk. He muttered to himself and seemed a little crazy. Near the city gate, the king of Bailiang, who was scolded as an old man, slightly hunched his back and opened the curtain. He looked sideways at the old Yao Baifeng and asked, "The one surnamed Yao is old and frivolous. Where is Lu Ying?" Yao Baifeng, whose body was especially sore from riding a horse without meat, said helplessly, replying to the prince, "According to my dynasty's ancestral teachings, the Duke of Huainan is not allowed to meet you." The guy who was the king of Bailiang, Su Shao, narrowed his eyes and said, "Oh." The horse caravan passed through the central axis of Magu City. Everyone knelt on the ground and didn't dare to raise their heads. It was just that every short distance, there was a shout. It was incessant. It made Yao Baifeng and the group of officials' scalps go numb. Jianzhou 18th Old Barracks, Green Mountain Barracks, Infantry Zhuzhen, pays respect to the great general. Liaoshi Heavenly Pass Barracks Cavalry Song Gong, pays respect to the great general. Pipa Barracks Archer Gong Duankong, pays respect to the great general. At this time, Yao Baifeng and the others couldn't help but remember the last words of the brilliant Bailiang soul-suppressing song. It was really frightening. Su Shao was born an outstanding person. Su Shao is also a ghost hero in death. I laugh as I go to Fengdu to recruit old subordinates, banners 1,000,000 to kill the king of hell. Chapter 138. The Dragon King in green robe blocked the river with his pole, causing the boat to topple over and the horses to fall into the water. For a moment, the river surface was unusually noisy. Many of the Phoenix Battalion soldiers were not proficient in water. In addition, the reef was abrupt, so after a few ups and downs, they were about to drown. Ningame picked up an armored soldier with one hand and his horse with the other. That tall, jet-black steed was forcibly dragged onto the deck of the boat by this halberd-wielding general. After saving the men and horses, he immediately leaped into the water. His bow, iron halberd, was left behind by his adoptive father. Even if Ningame drowned, he would still fish it out. At that time, the young man in green robe arrived on the floating boat and used the bamboo pole to raise the waves. If it were not for the fact that he did not have a halberd in his hand at that time, he would not have been defeated by that strange assassin. When Ningame broke out of the water, Su Fengnian drew his embroidered winter saber and chopped the railing of the big boat into more than a dozen pieces, kicking them into the Swallow River. His body floated down. Stepping on a wooden railing, he bent down and grabbed a Bailiang armored soldier and threw him back to the big boat. At the same time, Lu Yangshu and the other two, as well as Bluebird, all flew into the river like a swan treading on snow, each of them saving people and horses. The other three boatmen only saw the shadows skimming the surface of the river. They were dumbstruck. They originally thought that this group of river-crossing warriors was just a group of elite soldiers, but they did not expect that there were actually many immortal masters hidden among them, especially that handsome young master who wore a white robe and a jade belt. He had a pair of sabers on his waist, but his appearance was not gaudy at all. If the man in green robe who floated in and out of the small boat was the Swallow River Dragon King in human form, then this young master was a white dragon crossing the river with indescribable elegance. Su Fengnian went back and forth 4 or 5 times, breathing in and out continuously. He was not tired at all. Stepping on a section of the railing that he had chopped off with his embroidered winter saber, he looked toward the ghost gate of Dongling. He had a headache. Most of the people who fell into the river had already been rescued, but there were still 2 people who were about to hit the reefs of the ghost gate, so he did not have time to rescue them. When sailing a boat, he was not afraid of the wind and waves, but he was afraid of the reefs. 2 Bailiang warhorses hit the reefs with a loud crash, creating a pool of blood, which was swept away in an instant. Su Fengnian tiptoed on the railing and floated toward a reef. When he swept out again, it was just that one person was about to hit the reef. Su Fengnian looked back and saw that Ningame had just rescued a comrade at the bow of the boat. Su Fengnian suddenly had an idea and shouted loudly, "Ningame, throw the halberd and help me." Ningame took a step back with his right foot and roared angrily. He threw out the 80-kilogram halberd and stabbed it straight at a soldier who was about to hit the reef. Su Fengnian grabbed the halberd and took advantage of the momentum to fly up. At the critical moment, he grabbed the light cavalryman from the Bailiang battalion and nailed the halberd into the reef. Su Fengnian placed the light cavalryman in his hands on the reef and leaped up again and again. Finally, he saved the last light cavalryman from drowning. Together, they sat on the reef. The river water roared and splashed. Su Fengnian's luxurious clothes were soaked. The red date mark between his eyebrows shone brilliantly. The light cavalryman from the Phoenix Battalion who had narrowly escaped death coughed violently. He raised his head to look at the expressionless face of His Royal Highness. He was a little confused. His life had been saved by His Royal Highness, who was rumored to have no regard for human life in Bailiang. The large ship floated down. Ningame pulled out the reef halberd and pulled up the Bailiang soldiers. Su Fengnian helped the light cavalryman who was in a daze onto the bow of the ship. The captain of the Phoenix Battalion, Yuan Meng, had a complicated expression on his face. Not only him, but many of the light cavalrymen were also dumbstruck. Su Fengnian ignored them and only ordered, "General Ning, count the number of men and horses. Whoever loses his warhorse will be punished and will make up for his mistakes in the future." Ningame cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, "As you command." Even Yuan Meng couldn't help but lower his head and say, "As you command." The wet Su Fengnian entered the cabin, and the green bird helped him change into a new set of clothes. Su Fengnian frowned and said, "Fortunately, the Book Sword Beach is still fine, and most of the rocks are exposed. If we were to go down to the gates of hell, when the water is dry, the submerged rocks are like a stone forest, and the waterway is even narrower. I'm afraid we would have fallen into the water, and there would have been several casualties. Who is that man in green? He can overturn a large ship with just one strike of his bamboo pole, and his strength is beyond the description of a tiger. His dexterity is even more frightening, and it is clear that he has concealed superior swordsmanship. Aunt gave me a book on how to break the Wu family's withered sword on Mount Qingqing, and I saw that the man with the bamboo pole in his hand was a bit like the mountain lifting in the Wu family's sword tomb. Could he be this generation's sword champion Wu Luding? Bluebird held her hair in one hand and an ivory comb in the other. She carefully combed Su Fengnian's hair and said softly, "Let's not talk about whether or not that man is Wu Luding. Young Master's method of saving people is very pleasing to the eye." Even Ningame and Yuan Meng were cheering for young Master just now. "Especially when you flew with the halberd. Even this servant had to praise you." Su Fengnian lowered his head and looked at his red palm. He said self-deprecatingly, "Compared to overturning a ship with a single strike of a pole, my skills are far inferior. Unless the old god of swords, Li Chungang, is willing to help, no one can stop that guy who might be Wu Luding. They can only watch him leave on the ship." But to tell the truth, whether or not this move is the sword tomb's mountain picking, because of Gugu's 40 years of sword practice and the Wudong mountain riding bull's teachings of a set of fist techniques, there is a phrase in it: "The mountain is heavy as it is heavy, I use one tail to lift 10,000 jin." It is really a coincidence, so when I saw it just now, I was able to comprehend it by analogy. This is actually a good thing. Sure enough, I have to hurry up and let Lu Qiantang practice with me. After the calamity, Dongling Gorge became even more strange. The mountain peaks were abrupt and rugged, and the river was narrow and winding. There were only 3 ships left in the gorge. They brushed past the reefs again and again. It was hair-raising. Su Fengnian once again stood at the bow of the ship. The 2 young Kuei were chasing and playing by his feet. It was unknown when the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat appeared behind Su Fengnian. He laughed and said, "Young man, you have some experience in grasping people's hearts. If this old man did not know that the green-clothed swordsman was not one of your men, he might have suspected that you deliberately arranged this." Su Fengnian said unhappily, "I'm not that generous." Su Fengnian asked, "He really uses a sword?" The old god of swords nodded and said, "How can this old man not know whether or not he uses a sword? Those who come from the Wu family's sword tomb have the unique pedantic smell of withered swords. It's just that this young swordsman has taken a path of the sword that the Wu family's sword tomb is unwilling to take. In the future, his achievements will be greater than those of the previous generations. The prerequisite is that he can pass the Dongyue sword pool and Dongtai. If he passes it, it won't be difficult for him to enter heavenly phenomenon from the Xianfinger stage. If he doesn't pass it, the withered sword will be a real withered sword. How about that move, mountain toppling? Are you scared? Why don't this old man teach you the move, see overturning? Aren't you tired of carrying 2 swords? How about you lend one to this old man? If you do, this old man will immediately let you see the scene of a sword going against the flow of a great river." Su Fengnian sneered and said, "Don't even think about it." The old man picked his earwax and curled his lips. How can such a coward achieve great things? Su Fengnian said to himself, "What is Wu Luding trying to achieve with this pole?" Li Chungang said impatiently, "Kid, are you stupid or stupid? Isn't it just to make a name for yourself in the martial world? Otherwise, why would Wang Xinji call herself the second in the world? Why would Dong Tai use a peach blossom branch to make mischief? With a name, it would be perfectly justifiable for him to fight with others. Otherwise, who would be willing to deal with a nobody? When this old man was young, no matter who he was up against, he would chop melons and vegetables. Wasn't that just because he was swayed by his emotions and wanted to make a name for himself? Later on, when he got older, he lost his competitive spirit. This old man, Qi Xuanzhen, was really hateful. He talked about swords with him and caused this old man's state of mind to be in a mess. Not only did he fail to step into the realm of earth immortals, even the realm of heavenly phenomenon was close. One of his arms was chopped off and he was suppressed under the tide-listening pavilion. Kid, be more polite to this old man in the future. There are only about 10 heavenly phenomenon experts. It's just a pair of hands. Su Fengnian stretched out his arm and let the snow-white spear falcon land on his arm. He took out the small bamboo tube and pulled out the secret letter. He was stunned. Old Man Li had just said that he was one of the few heavenly phenomenon masters, and now he was tilting his head to peep without any demeanor. Su Fengnian did not mind. Li Chungang was also stunned, and then he clicked his tongue and said, "Giving Wang Zhonglo to your great yellow court was a losing deal that risked his life," this old man had already expected. It's just that new chief called Hong Shixiang did not even care about the Vajra finger and the 4th level of the profound realm, and he's already heavenly phenomenon in one step? Kid, don't play dumb with this old man, tell me the truth. Can this be trusted? Su Fengnian said emotionally, "If it was someone else, I wouldn't believe it. But for someone who rides a bull, I believe it." Li Chungang looked at the river surface and said absent-mindedly, "Isn't this what Qi Xuanzhen did back then? 20 years of cultivation stagnant. Once he comprehended, he became a celestial phenomenon. In another 10 years, he would become an earth immortal." Su Fengnian threw the secret letter into the river and said with a smile, "No matter what celestial phenomenon or earth immortal, I'll practice my blade." Chapter 139. The old man rubbed his earlobe and mocked, "Practice the knife? Let's not talk about the little Wudong chief who entered celestial phenomenon in one step. How can you compare to Wu Luding who can lift a mountain with a pole? You still have the heart to practice the knife? Practice my ass. With your cultivation speed, you can only eat the dust behind these geniuses for the rest of your life. As the son of Ren Tu and Wang Fei, don't you feel ashamed?" Su Fengnian smiled calmly and said, "What's there to be ashamed of? As long as the knife is in your hand, it's a mess. As long as you put in effort, there's nothing to complain about. How is Su Xiao a top martial arts master? Isn't it the same for the family business? My second sister was angry at me for practicing the saber because she was afraid that I would go crazy and abandon my home for the sake of practicing the saber. However, there are some things that can't be discussed on paper. The Shangyin Academy is the best example. Talking fast can only be a contest of strength between wise men. Once you meet a boor, you have to rely on your fists and knives to reason. There are only a few knowledgeable people in the world, and even fewer people with great knowledge." The old god of swords smiled and said, "That makes sense. This old man also doesn't like Confucian scholars to talk. Qi Xianzhu had such a bad temper back then, but he's a freak outside of common sense. He can reason with extravagant words and also slay demons and devils to become a Taoist priest. If he didn't have any tricks up his sleeve, who would be willing to listen to his lectures?" On the back of Su Fengnian's feet lay 2 naughty little tiger kuei, who were dozing off because they were tired from running. Su Fengnian bent down and squatted down, reaching out his hand to stroke the 2 cubs. The old god of swords suddenly stopped talking. Su Fengnian stood up, waking up the 2 cubs. They continued to jump happily at the bow of the ship. Su Fengnian asked curiously, "Old senior, can you really fly the sword?" The old man still looked up at the cliff without answering. At the end of the ridge, the 2 cliffs were as neat as a knife. They were less than 10 feet apart and were shaped like a door, allowing only one boat to pass through. That was the last gate of hell. On the mountain rock were the 4 words, "Ghost Weeping Impregnable Pass." It was carved by the great Taoist Lu Dongxian of Mount Wudong who ascended on a crane. Interestingly, Lu Dongxian was known as one of the 3 immortals of pill, sword, and poem. Not only was his swordsmanship superb, he was also a famous land sword immortal. At the same time, he was also proficient in alchemy. Many poems, but there were only 8 words calligraphy, except Ghost Weeping Immortal Pass and Black Tortoise Rise, both, and out of the gate of hell, the view suddenly opened up. The Yanzi River, Shu River, and Kanglin River converged. This was once the battlefield of the 3 kingdoms of spring and autumn. Since ancient times, it was a famous place where countless heroes fought. The river water changed from rapid to slow, and the river surface changed from narrow to wide. It was as if a lifetime had passed, falling from the netherworld to the world of the living, making people feel relaxed and happy. Su Fengnian saw old man Li, who wore a smelly sheepskin coat all year round, coming out of the gate of hell. He was still turning his head to look at the 4 words, "Ghost Whale's Impregnable Pass" on the cliff. He was a little sad. When this god of swords of the older generation in the Jianghu was not picking his feet, nose, or earwax, especially when he was standing still and concentrating, Su Fengnian clearly remembered that he was Li Chungang. Even if his sword was broken and his arm was broken, he was still a celestial who once dominated the world of swordsmanship. He heard the old man murmur, "This old man did many ridiculous things when he was young. He entered Vajra at 16, Finger Mystery at 19, and reached Celestial Phenomenon at 24. He was known as a sword celestial talent that only appears once every 500 years. When he first appeared in the Jianghu, he stepped on the tower and crossed the river under the gaze of millions of spectators. When he was 24, he went to the Dongyue sword pool to challenge Wu Wei of the Plum Blossom Sword sect. He humiliated that senior to the extreme and caused him to stretch his neck to commit suicide. When he was 36, he claimed that he was invincible in the world and that the other 4 grandmasters were just fishing for fame. Even if Wang Xiu, the green robe of Fengdu and the red armor of Fu Jiang joined forces, they would still be defeated by my sword. Later on, I did not lose to them, but lost to the junior Wang Xinch. She left Fengdu to find me. This silly woman purposely let me pierce her chest with my sword. In order to save her, I went to Mount Longhu and asked Qi Xuanzhen for the life-prolonging golden pill. However, before I reached the devil-slaying platform, she died. Before she died, she said that she did not want to live. She wanted to die in my arms. If she lived, we would be strangers again. She was unwilling. Even at that time, I still did not have the courage to say it. Without her, 1 sword, 2 swords, 100 swords, 10,000 swords, so what? This gate of hell was the place where I first met her. At that time, I could already fly with my sword, but she was just a silly girl who had not yet learned martial arts. Later on, how she became the green robe of Fengdu, and why she became the green robe of Fengdu, I do not know. I only know that we will never meet again in this life. All kinds of glory and disgrace, all kinds of things, are like smoke in the wind. I like little Jiang because I feel sorry for her. She climbed the Lotus Peak and went down the devil-slaying platform. I learned from Qi Xuanzhen that she was the daughter of my enemy. Since she was unfortunate enough to meet me and could not kill me, she wanted to die in my hands. The most bitter is lovesickness, the furthest is yin and yang. Su Fengyan was speechless. All kinds of deeds of the sword god Li Chungang in the past were blurred in the past 40 years. Qi Xuanzhen had already ascended. Wang Xinji stayed in the martial emperor city and never left the eastern sea, the green robe of Fengdu was already dead, and the red armor talisman general seemed to have become a puppet. Those who were lucky enough to see the sword god of the older generation, even if they were still alive, were mostly old people in their 60s. It was just like the old saying of the sword immortal ancestor Lu, that all glory and splendor would become an illusion when sleeping until the 2nd or 3rd night watch. Thinking of 100 years later, no one would be an ancient person. Chapter 140. Li Chungang said self-deprecatingly, "When I was young, I wanted to be Ancestor Lu, which is exactly the same as Qi Xuanzhen. It's just that I liked Ancestor Lu's sword, while Qi Xuanzhen was Ancestor Lu's Dao. That's why I liked to use Ancestor Lu's flying sword to take people's heads, but I was scolded by Qi Xuanzhen." This old Taoist sat on the devil-slaying platform and said something about the 2 of them fighting, the upper part chopping off the neck and the lower part chopping off the liver and lungs. So what if the flying sword was 1,000 miles away? Listen, isn't this tone very arrogant? At that time, this old man was disheartened and willingly admitted defeat. In addition, he saw this guy who was both friend and foe flying in the white rainbow with his own eyes. He really had nothing to say. At that time, he felt that maybe he was wrong. Qi Xuanzhen had comprehended the longevity physique. This old man who had 1 foot in celestial phenomenon and 1 foot in earth immortal retreated 1,000 miles. After going down the mountain, one of his arms was chopped off and he fell into Finger Mystery realm. He didn't dare to say anything about slaying a flood dragon. However, after all these years under the tide-listening pavilion, he understood a simple truth. Hey Qi Xuanzhen, this old urchin, deliberately misled me. Su Fengyan sighed softly. The ship no longer swayed when it entered the river. Back then, it was an eye-opener for him and old Huang. After a long time, the old god of swords finally came back to his senses. When he was ready to turn back, he saw Jiang and I, who was vomiting all the way out of the cabin. She held onto the railing and her face was still pale. However, she was much better than Swordbook Beach and Dongling Pass. Compared to Su Fengnian, who was half dead for the first time on the ship, both of them were more or less in a sorry state. Blue Bird jumped down from the second floor of the ship lightly and said softly, "Your Highness, the person who overturned the ship is waiting for us in the middle of the river." As expected, the ship gradually moved forward and they saw the green shirt guest again. This Wu Luding really ate a lot of bear's heart and leopard's guts. Wasn't one pole provocation not enough? Could it be that he would only stop when all of them were flipped over by 3 poles? Su Fengnian's eyes widened as he looked at the Wu family's sword crown that was becoming clearer and clearer. This young swordsman's appearance was nothing out of the ordinary. His face was old-fashioned, and at first glance, one could tell that he was an unapproachable and reclusive person. The withered sword of the sword tomb had always been like this. If a junior swordsman wanted to leave the mountain to gain experience, they had to first defeat an ancestor of the family, regardless of life or death. Wu Luding was tall and slender. Today, he did not bring a sword with him. Instead, he carried the dark green bamboo pole on his shoulder with both hands. His posture was extremely arrogant. Jiang and I endured the discomfort of vomiting. Even she could see the daring assassin on the floating boat. The boatman had said that this person was the Dragon King, but she didn't believe him. She turned her head and frowned. Looking at Su Fengnian, she weakly asked, "You can't defeat this person?" Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily and shook his head. "Of course not." Jiang and I sneered and said, "Then what did you learn from your sword practice?" Su Fengnian laughed and said, "I don't know either. But you can ask Elderly if he knew he would become a sword god from the first day he practiced swordsmanship." Little did he know that Old Man Li would expose him. This old man knew. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes. Jiang and I was in a good mood. She smiled, and 2 dimples quietly appeared on her cheeks. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "You look good." Jiang and I immediately put on a straight face. Su Fengnian said with a cheeky smile, "Little mud man, come, smile again. If you smile, I will raise my sword and kill that first-rate swordsman even though I know I can't defeat him. This is such a good deal. Who knows, I might never return. If the old sword god comes to save me, you will cry and snot. This way, you can guarantee that I will die in battle. How about it? Smile one more time?" Jiang Ni's little head was dizzy. Seasickness made her want to jump into the river. She hated His Royal Highness who insisted on taking the boat down. She spent a lot of effort thinking about this deal. Finally, she could not resist Su Fengnian's bewitching urging. Finally, she squeezed out a stiff smile that she thought was impeccable. Su Fengnian immediately laughed and scolded, "Too ugly. No sincerity. I won't do a deal that will make me lose money." Jiang and I helplessly changed her smile a few times, but it was not satisfactory. Su Fengnian deliberately sighed and said that the deal was not going to work. Anyway, there were many experts on the boat. He did not believe that they could not defeat that bastard who came alone to seek death. Even the Dragon King would be skinned alive. Jiang and I smiled for a long time. Her little face was stiff. In the end, she saw that His Royal Highness who was afraid of death and was secretly happy. She was so angry that she ran up to Su Fengnian and wanted to fight it out with him. Su Fengnian threatened, "Bite me? Be careful that I don't let the Vajra Bodhisattva bite you." The timid little mud man did not dare to go forward. He widened his eyes, hoping to use his gaze to cut Su Fengnian to death. Su Fengnian held his stomach and laughed. After laughing, he turned around with a serious expression. For the first time, he held his saber with both hands and prepared to float out of the boat. He really wanted to fight that pole-wielding Wu Luding. Su Fengnian was just about to rush out of the boat. The old god of swords, who had been watching the 2 young fellows fight, waved his sleeve and pulled Su Fengnian back. His Royal Highness fell on the deck of the boat, looking funny. Jiang and I finally smiled knowingly. The old god of swords was in a daze. He looked at the vexed Su Xiaoxiu and then looked at the smiling Jiang and I. Back then, when they met by chance, he crossed the river with his flying sword and recited poems. She was lying on the railing of the boat with the same smile. That year, it was the time when the youngest and most dazzling sword genius, Li Chungang, was the most high-spirited. It was also the age when that silly girl was the most naive and innocent. When they brushed past each other, he only pursued the great way of the sword and did not miss it. She, on the other hand, foolishly missed it for the rest of her life. The old god of swords silently recited the poem from back then. When I forge 3,000 blades, a jade dragon howls when I open the box. The spirit in my hand is 3 feet of ice, a snake of divine will on the rock. The old god of swords stretched out his only arm and said softly, Su Fengyan, lend this old man a sword. Just a sword. Su Fengyan was stunned. Li Chungang muttered, I owe you a sword. Su Fengyan gritted his teeth and pulled out embroidered winter. He threw it above the river as if he wanted to throw it to the green shirt on the small boat 1,000 feet away. The old god of swords, who was facing Jiang and I, looked at her one last time. Back then, he said that the little clay figurine in Su Xiaoshuo's mouth looked like the king of Baoyang's concubine. In fact, it was not completely true. She looked more like the girl who liked to wear green clothes. Li Chungang smiled and floated out of the boat upside down. He raised his head and laughed heroically, Little green robe, look at this sword of Li Chungang. Frowning and thundering, the evil flood dragon of the Swallow River is fat. Wielding my sword in the air, I'll return at the second watch. With his back facing the small boat, the green shirt, the sword crown, and the embroidered winter knife were gone. Without the divine weapon wooden horse and ox, the old man, who only had one arm, held the embroidered winter that was not a sword. He turned around and casually used a sword move. Qi Xuanzhen said that I used sword strength to prove my Tao and was not as good as the Tao of heaven. Yet you said that one sword move was enough. I, Li Chungang, want the Tao of heaven. One sword move was enough. At first, no one saw the elegance of this sword move. They only felt that it was boring. The river was silent. However, the green shirt dragon king did not care about the small boat. He shot far away. In an instant, the river was split open with a rumble, reaching 2,000 feet. Such a legendary sword immortal of the land. If there were any flood dragons in the world, they would be killed on the spot. Chapter 141. Although it was said to be one night watch, the sword that could split rivers and slay dragons did not even need one night watch to return. Old Man Li's sword broke the sky for no reason, as if he had returned to the highest state of martial arts. Without any surprise, he floated back to the bow and threw Xiaodong back to Su Fengyan. He looked at the river and the cliff, as if he had untied the knot in his heart. He smiled bitterly and then walked into the cabin silently. Lu Qiantang, who was watching the tide and practicing his heavy sword, was stunned by this sword. He finally remembered the carefree senior who stepped on the tide of the Guangling River a long time ago. Not to mention a strong swordsman like Lu Qiantang, even Wei Shuyang, who had abandoned his sword to cultivate Taoism, could not help but have his hair and beard fluttering. Which young man would not want to follow sword god Li's footsteps in Jianghu? Dong Tai was the new sword god, but he was not as intimidating and convincing as Li Chungang. Dong Tai was half immortal and half demon, like a celestial being who was millions of miles away from the earth. After his debut, he had only fought with Wang Xinji, Chao Guanzi, and a few others. After that, there were some scattered rumors which made people think about it. However, sword god Li of the older generation had made a name for himself in Jianghu with his sword, especially the love and hate entanglements he had with women. Many of the younger generation yearned for him. For example, the old Taoist priest Wei Shuyang remembered that when Li Chungang was at the peak of his martial arts, there was a female poet who admired him and wrote countless poems. She praised Li Chungang for destroying the first peak of Zhongnan with his flying sword, said that the green snake in his sleeve was bold, and even said that his 3-foot spirit was like ancestor Lu, standing up for the heavens and the people. All of this was in the past. She was old and her hair had turned white. She had been buried in a lonely grave, but before she died, she did not forget to ask her descendants to burn her poems. When sword god Li was still in Jianghu, there were countless of her, who became the weak water, but he did not take any of them. Back then, there were many people and many things in Jianghu, just like them. Their glory was gone. Xu Xiu, who had always been fearless, had sweat seeping out of her nose. She looked at the river surface closing up again, and the boat gradually stopped swaying left and right. She turned to look at Lu Qiantang beside her and asked in a trembling voice, "So this old man is really a senior who can compete with immortal Qi?" Even though Qi Xuanzhen had ascended to immortality tens of years ago, even if he wasn't a Taoist from the Longhu Mountain, when his descendants mentioned him, they didn't dare to directly refer to him by his name. They all referred to him as Immortal Qi. This was the strength of those at the celestial phenomenon realm. Lu Qiantang, whose soul had almost been scattered by that sword, said in a low voice, "You still don't know who he is?" Although Xu Xiu was almost 30 years old, she was still a little naive and unaffected. It was unknown whether it was because she was proficient in the art of seduction or because it was her nature. She pouted out of habit and said coquettishly, "How would I know? The senior can't be Dong Tai." Lu Qiantang was annoyed that the sword was so mysterious that he did not see any clues. In addition, this Dongyue swordsman had always disliked Xu Xiu's pretentious attitude, so his tone was a little heavier. "A southern barbarian is just a frog at the bottom of a well." Xu Xiu reached out and brushed her hair behind her ear. She tilted her head and smiled coquettishly. "Oh, Dongyue is not a barbarian land? That senior is so amazing that our sword god Lu thinks so highly of him?" Lu Qiantang turned his head gloomily. What kind of sword god was he? This woman from the southern barbarian land really wanted to taste the sharpness of the red cloud sword. Wei Shuyang, who happened to be beside the two, shook his head and did not say anything to persuade them. He went straight to His Royal Highness. Su Fengnian sat at the bow of the boat. He untied the double sabers and put them aside. He reached out and teased the Vajra and Bodhisattva. The two little guys' tongues were born with hooks. A light lick would leave a series of scratches on his hands. Su Fengnian could not stand the endless torment of the siblings. Not only was he slightly injured, but his ivory white silk cuffs had already become ragged. He picked up the spring thunder saber and let the young Kuei King Kong hold it with its 4 claws. It was obvious that this male Kuei was more lively. Wei Xiang could not stand and talk to His Royal Highness who was sitting. He sat cross-legged and said emotionally, "Your Highness, I was lucky enough to read Wudong's deed of thorough comprehension in my old age. Today, I met old sword god Li's godly ability to cut 2,000 feet of the river. I have no regrets in this life." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Grandpa Wei, tell me, is old man Li's sword referring to the celestial phenomenon or the celestial phenomenon?" Wei Shuyang shook his head and said, "It has the meaning of an earth immortal. I really don't dare to say that old sword god Li is the celestial phenomenon." Su Fengnian leaned against the wooden wall and joked, "Won't this sword be able to break through hundreds of armors? If 2 armies are facing each other and there are 3 or 4 old men Li who take the lead to attack, how can the battle be fought?" Wei Xiang smiled and said, "Your Highness, how many sword gods Li have there been in Jianghu in the past 100 years? How many celestial phenomenon realm masters are willing to be bound by military law? Being trapped in the army is not suitable for cultivation." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Indeed, who can trouble Wang Xianji Dong Tai to charge and break through the enemy's lines? During the Spring and Autumn War, I heard that the royal uncle of Western Shu who had outstanding swordsmanship did not hesitate to sacrifice himself to fight the enemy and killed 600 steel cavalry. However, he could not fight against the following steel cavalry and died in the crossbow formation. The Jianghu of martial artists is like the Yanzi River from before. Under the water, there are hidden reefs and teeth protruding. On the water, there are peaks competing with each other. As for who can be as unreachable as Lu Dongxian, it is even more of a skill. And the army, which was all for the sake of war, became the vast body of water that we were in. Hundreds of rivers and thousands of streams converged. Unless it was a famous general like Su Shao who became a lonely island, otherwise, no matter how capable you were, you would fall under the thousands of troops. Before Su Shao led the army to trample on the pugilistic world, martial artists and soldiers despised each other. It could not be said that they were superior. Now, the pugilistic world really did not have the confidence to challenge the army. Mount Longhu was conferred the title of the chief of the world's Taoist sections. The two Zen temples produced a black-clothed monk who was friends with His Majesty. Only then was the decline of Buddhism restored. The three sects of Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism continued to be a tripartite balance of forces. The masters of these three sects strived to appear in the world. Occasionally, they would appear in the world and turn the tide. In Su Zhao's army, there are few Jianghu people who agree with Bailiang and hold the commander's seal. Wei Shuyang seemed to be immersed in the lingering charm of the old god of swords and his sword. He was a little absent-minded, but it could be seen that the old Taoist priest's face was full of joy, like a child who had received a stick of candied haws. It was very simple and there was no great reason to speak of. It was hard to imagine that with Wei Shuyang's position in the way of 9 pecks of rice and his age, he still had such a childlike heart. No matter how down and out Li Chuangong's appearance was, Wei Shuyang was only concerned about the 3 swords. The water droplets formed a line to break the water armor, the small umbrella as the sword, the immortal kneeled down with 1 sword, and today's fairy sword. In the old Taoist priest's opinion, it was truly worthy of the poetic comment of a bold green snake on the sleeve. It was no wonder that as long as the world was not peaceful, the Jianghu would not be peaceful. It was because everyone wanted to be like Lu Dongxian and Li Chungang, who met with injustice and found peace. Jiang Anai was not confident that he could win against the 2 young strange beasts. He felt that the scenery of the river that he was obsessed with before was not so beautiful anymore. He returned to the cabin discouraged and saw old man Li sitting on the chair without saying a word. While he was half asleep and half awake, Jiang Anai picked up a secret manual and looked at it absent-mindedly for a while. He asked softly, "Are you planning to teach him how to use the sword?" Li Chungang raised his eyelids and laughed. "There's no harm in teaching him a few small tricks. This old man is nice to him, isn't it, so that you won't be bullied?" Still the same words. As long as you're willing to practice the sword with this old man, even if young Su has mastered the sword, you can still kill him. Jiang and I hesitated for a while and changed the topic. "Your swordsmanship seems to be really scary." Chapter 142. Old man Li laughed heartily. "Little Jiang girl, you won't say that this old man is boasting anymore, right? However, this old man is telling the truth. That sword just now was a stroke of luck. It was only when the right time, place, and people were all present that it had this kind of power. In this world, things that don't go your way are as numerous as the hairs on a cow. How many words can you say to others? Therefore, there are millions of swords in the world, but the immortal swords of sword immortals should also be pitifully few. Moreover, this old man's sword was called by the people of the Jianghu as the realm of sword immortals cannot exist forever. This old man is very open-minded now. He doesn't have extravagant hopes of becoming a land immortal. He only wants to teach you everything he knows. If he teaches you how to use the sword, there's hope that he can teach a female sword immortal. It's also good for this old man's reputation." Jiang and I said calmly, "Then you'd better teach him how to use the sword." The old man didn't take it to heart. He muttered to himself, "Ancestor Lu had a poem as a warning to those who came to learn the sword later on. 3 feet in the box don't cry out often. If I don't meet someone, I swear I won't pass it on." I deeply agree. This old man has met countless juniors who practiced the sword in his life. There's no lack of sword geniuses with extraordinary perception and bone structure. However, if you can't match this old man's temper, even if you're Dong Tai, you can forget about learning this old man's 2-sleeved green snake. The Wu family's sword mound gave up sword intent for heavenly sword moves and looked down on the world's sword moves. Only this old man's unique skill, not to mention how peerless his sword intent is, his sword moves are also exquisite to the peak. Back then, it made those half-dead people of the Wu family feel inferior. Jiang and I frowned and sighed heavily. She put down the book and glared, "Again?" Li Chungang scratched the divine talisman dagger that was pinned to his hair bun. His expression was slightly awkward. If it was anyone else outside the cabin, they would treat his words as an imperial edict. However, this stubborn girl in front of him was really not buying the old god of swords' words. Li Chungang wasn't annoyed. He picked up a handful of pecans from the table and walked out of the cabin. He ignored the boatman who worshipped him as the Dragon King, the reverence of Lu Qiantang and the other martial artists, and the fear of some Bailiang cavalry. He walked to Su Fengnian and Wei Shuyang and sat down casually. He stretched out his leg and kicked away the young Kuei that had just fallen from the spring thunder saber. The elder sister Bodhisattva wanted to avenge her younger brother. She immediately scratched 4 small holes on the ground with her sharp claws and roared. Su Fengnian reached out and pressed down on the little guy who was protecting him. The young female Kuei turned her head and showed a very human face of grievance. Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. The young Kuei was very intelligent and ran to comfort her younger brother. Old God of Swords Li was puzzled. "Kid, where did you find this beast? It's not inferior to Qi Xuanzhen's black tiger. In a few years, 2 of them will be comparable to a level 1 expert. It's a pity that you can't live for 200 or 300 years like them." Su Fengnian was even more puzzled and asked, "What's the matter?" The old man casually threw the pecans in his hand on the deck and said in an old-fashioned manner, "Kid, that morning in the Qingyang Palace, I saw your 3-legged cat saber technique. It was really an eyesore. Take out the embroidered winter saber with a thinner blade and do as this old man said." Su Fengnian did not hesitate and sat up straight. Du Sikong, the master swordsman who wrote the outline of 1,000 swords, had stood in the snow for 3 days in order to seek advice from Li Chenggang. Su Fengnian was not a pretentious person who put on airs and immediately took out the embroidered winter saber with a blade as thin as a cicada's wing. The embroidered winter saber was slender and thinner than the spring thunder. Using it to practice saber was a test of one's mastery of saber strength. A slight difference in saber strength would result in a huge deviation. Later, White Fox lent him the spring thunder. Presumably, half of it was because she saw through Su Fengnian's deliberate concealment of the left-hand saber, and the other half was because the spring thunder was more suitable for the overbearing heavy saber. Su Fengnian had a solid foundation in the Great Yellow Court. Moreover, he had not practiced saber for a year for nothing, nor had he read all the martial arts secret manuals for nothing. He was almost considered to have reached a higher level in martial arts. When he used the spring thunder, they could complement each other and complement each other. Su Fengnian had put in a lot of effort, which meant that he had tacitly acknowledged Idiot Su as his friend and confidant. Su Fengnian pulled out the embroidered winter saber. Seeing the old god of sword remain silent, he asked in a low voice, "And then?" Wei Shuyang was even more cautious. The person beside him was old god of sword Li. Although Li Chenggang was defeated by Wang Xianji and Wei Shuyang abandoned his sword to cultivate in the mountains out of anger, in the eyes of his generation, no matter how powerful Dong Tai was, he was not as impressive as the old god of sword Li. "You, Dong Tai, defeated god of sword Li? How could you call him god of sword if you didn't even defeat him?" Li Chenggang yawned and asked Su Fengnian to hang the saber at a fixed height. He said impatiently, "Kid, try to flick the saber with your finger and see if you can break the walnuts on the floor." Su Fengnian adjusted his breathing, squinted his eyes, and stretched out his finger. With a crisp ding sound, Wei Shuyang, who was watching attentively, saw the embroidered winter saber curve in an arc. Unfortunately, it was still a finger's length away from the walnuts on the floor. Su Fengnian was not discouraged. His finger brushed lightly on the saber, found a point, and flicked it. The embroidered winter saber curved like a full moon. With a ding and a bang, it smashed a walnut in an instant, leaving a mark on the floor of the boat. Wei Shuyang subconsciously wanted to stroke his beard, but he suddenly realized that old god of sword Li was present. He did not dare to act rashly. However, the old Taoist was very impressed with His Royal Highness's flick of the saber. Although the embroidered winter saber was thin, not everyone could flick it with such tenacity. Old Man Li supported his cheek with one hand and continued, "Next, try to crush the walnuts, but don't leave a mark on the floor." Su Fengnian frowned slightly, but he did not hurry to snap his fingers. Instead, he rubbed the embroidered winter saber. He had benefited a lot from comprehending the essence of swordsmanship in the Qingshui Pavilion Sword Training Manual on Mount Wudong, which allowed Su Fengnian to have the consciousness to control the flow of qi in the body, which was the root of the saber strength. Shattering a walnut without affecting the ship's deck was no longer a simple matter of increasing or decreasing the strength. It was the same as a master of swordsmanship who seemed to easily stab with his sword but contained countless complicated sword moves. Sweeping the saber and accumulating strength, it was important to know when and where to explode, how much to explode, how much to explode, how heavy or heavy. These were all profound knowledge that gave Su Fengnian a headache. Su Fengnian did not snap his fingers, so the old man was still holding his chin, calm and unruffled. He pinched a walnut with 2 fingers and threw it in front of his eyes. He gently sucked it into his mouth and said vaguely, "Kid, hurry up. I don't have time to watch you daze." Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. He collected his thoughts and flicked his finger. The curve was still full and had a mysterious beauty. The walnut shattered, but there was a slight mark on the floor. He flicked his blade several times and it was the same. The old god of swords said with disdain, "You read the 1,000 sword grass compendium for nothing. Is this how you listen to books? What a waste of little Zhang's saliva." Su Fengnian closed his eyes and recalled the scene of the water droplets turning into swords. The old man stood up and patted his butt. He sneered, "When you succeed, stack up 2 walnuts again. Remember to smash the bottom walnut. The floor of the boat and the top walnut must be intact." However, this old man reckons that with your terrible perception, not to mention the latter, even a small matter like this would be difficult. If you can't do it, then don't practice the saber with Lu Qiantang. Su Fengnian remained silent and racked his brains. The old god of swords probably felt that this fellow was too similar to the Wu family's swordmaster. He was in a bad mood and walked into the cabin without looking back. Wei Shuyang quietly left the bow of the boat so that no one would disturb him. He sat there until dusk and then until moonlight. Yu Yue went to put on a coat for Su Fengnian in the middle of the night. Su Fengnian only pointed at the shattered walnuts on the floor. Yu Yue immediately went to get another handful and piled them in front of him. In the early morning, the old man came to the bow of the boat with sleepy eyes and saw Su Fengnian in a daze. He went closer to take a look. This kid changed the winter to spring thunder. And on the floor in front of him, there were 3 walnuts. Several red carps leaped out of the river. This was a common sight in large rivers. The old god of swords turned and left. After walking far away, he muttered to himself, "Good kid, the carp has jumped over the dragon's gate. I made a mistake this time." However, this old man wants to see how many times you can jump over the next 10 years. Chapter 143. The 2 young Kuei were curled up and sleeping soundly at Su Fengnian's feet, looking charmingly naive. They were easy to raise and could easily be thrown into the river to feed on the carps in the river. When they were done eating and playing, they stretched out their oars and easily boarded the boat with their hook-like claws. Su Fengnian, who was about to get up, looked up and saw the old god of swords walking back. Su Fengnian had a good memory, so good that Su Weisheng said that his only advantage was that he could remember things. He could read 10 lines at a glance and almost never forget anything he saw. Wudong's previous chief Wang Zhongluo's Da Huang Ting formula, Bull Rider's deed of thorough comprehension, Qingshui Pavilion sword training record, 7 or 8 books of the Jade Pillar mental cultivation method, Du Sitsong's 1,000 Swords Grass Compendium, Forbidden Villa's whale killing sword, and the 3 secret manuals of the Qingyang Palace. He had read a lot of them after climbing up and down the tide listening pavilion for so many years, but unfortunately, most of them were careless and not attentive. Su Fengnian had a particularly deep memory of them. However, when he was practicing the blade, the white-haired old man only led this Su Fengnian of His Royal Highness over the threshold before laughing out loud. Later, in the Qingyang Palace, his aunt suggested that Su Fengnian first practice 50 moves to the peak, which could be considered a small path to success. But here came the problem. Su Fengnian had not reached the second pin, so he could not assess the hundreds and thousands of martial arts in the world from a strategically advantageous position. He read too many books, which instead became a hindrance to his cultivation. Until Li Chungang came up with the difficult problem of breaking walnuts with a flick knife, it was like tearing a thin crack in the fog. Su Fengnian was no stranger to this problem. When State Preceptor Li Yishan taught Su Fengnian the 15 ways of Zongjing, he liked to use his new Go rules to break them. Su Fengnian sat in boredom until dawn, during which time he successfully flicked the walnuts into fine powder with the embroidered winter knife. The boat was still in good condition, and even stacking the walnuts was not a problem for the embroidered winter knife. Li Chungang sat in front of Su Fengnian and asked, "Do you know the difference between sword moves and sword intent?" Su Fengnian shook his head blankly. The old man said expressionlessly, "Draw your blade." Su Fengnian laid embroidery winter flat. The old god of swords stretched out a finger and casually flicked the blade. Without any visible movement, the 3 walnuts in front of Su Fengnian exploded at the same time. The old man gently flicked his sleeves and folded up 3 walnuts. He flicked the xiaodong again, but the walnuts still shattered. The results were exactly the same. Su Fengnian did not know what the old god of swords was up to. Seeing Su Fengnian's puzzled expression, Li Chungang sneered, "Try placing the spring thunder under the winter embroidery." Su Fengnian held the blade with both hands. Old man Li struck the winter embroidery again. Su Fengnian's perlicue trembled. He could not hold the spring thunder firmly because there was a point on the spring thunder blade that was like an exploding thunder. It spread to Su Fengnian's hand, causing his entire arm to tingle and go numb. Su Fengnian understood. This was sword intent. The storytellers in the streets liked to call it sword aura, but it was slightly different. Old man Li did not give Su Fengnian time to catch his breath. He struck the winter embroidery again. In an instant, the spring thunder almost slipped out of his hand. The blade on the right suddenly slid toward Su Fengnian's chest. It was only a hair's breadth away, but the old god of swords had pinched the spring thunder with 2 fingers. The winter embroidery blade did not move at all. Su Fengnian was shocked. He could not figure it out even if he racked his brains. Old god of swords seemed to think that this kid's comprehension was too poor. He would not feel at ease if he did not scold him. He glared and said, "Anyone can see that your winter embroidery blade is bent in an arc. It looks exciting to outsiders, but it's flashy without substance. With this old man's winter embroidery blade, with your insignificant skills, can you tell how many times winter embroidery blade has flicked? It looks like winter embroidery blade is not moving, but it's really not moving. This old man has 2 fingers. One of them penetrated the winter embroidery blade and hit the spring thunder. The second finger is sacrificing vigor for sword moves. Winter embroidery blade has already bent 6 times and hit the spring thunder blade from the side. That's why the spring thunder struck you. A top-notch sword move requires speed and stability. It's as fast as thunder and as steady as the 5 sacred mountains. Kid, you're still too inexperienced." Su Fengnian asked doubtfully, "Between sword intent and sword moves, which one is stronger?" Old god of swords Li sneered. "This old man wants to use sword intent to defeat the enemy. That means sword intent is stronger. If this old man wants to use sword moves to kill people, his sword moves will naturally be stronger than all sword intent in the world." "Fine, I asked for nothing." Su Fengnian felt helpless. Old man Li was a fair trade. He stood up and said, "Are these 2 fingers enough to buy all your rice paper?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "It's enough." Looking at the old man's back, Su Fengnian could not help but have mixed feelings. Killing a Jiao dragon where there was a Jiao dragon was not a boast. The old man even hid a Jiao dragon in his sleeves. It was the purest form of yang energy and was incomparably domineering. His flying sword destroyed Mount Taihua. It was said that he had mastered the essence of Lu Dongshuan's immortal sword. Naturally, this hidden sword was 100 times more powerful than the sword that made the immortal kneel. Su Fengnian originally wondered why Li Chungang had 2 sleeves after losing his arm, but now he dared not underestimate him. 2 fingers, one indicating sword intent, and the other indicating swordsmanship. His words were profound and easy to understand. He had pointed out a narrow path for Su Fengnian, who was confused at the crossroads of martial arts. Together with the words of the armored maid, Zhao Yute, Su Fengnian felt as if he had just escaped from the gates of hell. As for when he could reach the first Pin realm, or even touch the edge of the Vajra realm, Su Fengnian was not in a hurry. This was all thanks to old Huang's subtle influence. Teaching by example was often useless. Instead, it was better to teach by example. Of course, old Huang's sword was still a distance away from the old god of swords Li Chungang. However, in Su Fengnian's heart, It was obvious which was more important between Old Huang's sword case and the old god of swords wooden bowl. Riding out of Bailiang, Su Fengnian finally learned from Su Shao what Old Huang had said to Wang Xinji when he was facing the north before his death. Su Fengnian stood with his hand on his saber. Looking at the vast river, he closed his eyes and breathed continuously. His qi was as continuous as the river water. He chanted the incantation of the Great Yellow Court. Qi returns to the pill formula. The pot produces water and water. Yin and yang come and go, turning into a thunderclap. Who can't live forever? The white rainbow rides the dragon and goes straight to the Daluo heaven. Generally speaking, the proverbs of the Taoist immortals who cultivated Taoism were often in the pursuit of wondrous words. When ordinary people first read it, they would only feel that it was wondrous, 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 and even more wondrous. In fact, if there were no enlightened Taoist to personally lead the way and pass on the specific incantation of breathing and drawing qi, in the end, they would only enter the mountain and not see the immortal and return empty-handed. As the saying goes, the immortal is unwilling to speak clearly, but thousands and thousands of people are bewitched by this logic. While Su Fengnian's mind was wandering 10,000 li, he sensed that someone was walking behind him. At this moment, the only person who dared to come forward and disturb His Royal Highness was Yue. She held Wu Meinyang and said softly, "Aren't you going to eat something?" Su Fengnian opened his eyes and grunted. He shot a glance at Yue. She was indeed a beauty. It was a pity that ancestor Lu had long left behind a poem to warn the later generations. The body of a 16-year-old beauty was soft and limp. Her waist was like a sword that could cut ordinary men. Although her head didn't fall, she secretly caused her husband's spirit to wither. Su Fengnian felt very helpless about this. He wasn't an inexperienced flower. From the time he went up the mountain to practice his blade to the time he went down the mountain, he had always been able to remain calm. This kind of composure was evident. During the meal, only Su Fengnian, the old god of swords, and Wei Shuyang were sitting at the table. Li Chungang chewed on a piece of flatbread and remembered something. He said casually, "Although this old man avoided that Wu family swordsman, he can come back later. It's very likely that his realm is one level higher. That sword move, you bunch of idiots only watched for fun. That fellow, on the other hand, can comprehend something that will be of great benefit to his sword cultivation." Su Fengnian's face stiffened. He fiercely took a bite of the bun. After breakfast, old god of swords Li spread out rice paper in the cabin. He smiled at Jiang and I, who was hiding to read. "Come, Jiang girl. It's fine if you don't want to learn the sword, but this old man can teach you calligraphy." Calligraphy? Jiang and I liked it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have secretly used a branch to scribble on the ground in Bailiang Palace. However, the old man held the brush with one hand. His demeanor completely changed. He was still smiling. "But remember, I'll teach you calligraphy. You can watch, but you're not allowed to learn." Jiang and I didn't take it to heart. She only grunted softly. Su Fengnian asked Bluebird to warm a pot of yellow wine and sat alone. That year at the top of Martial Emperor's city wall, Old Huang didn't fall even after death. Beside him was the second in the world, Wang Xinji. Old Huang only faced north and said, "Come, serve the young master some wine." Chapter 144. 3 big ships entered the lake from the river. The 800 miles of Spring Lake was vast and misty. This lake could hold 6 rivers, and it had always been a place for military strategists to fight to the death. Su Fengnian stood at the bow of the ship and explained the geography of Spring Lake to Yue. He included many military insights that Li Yishan had imparted to him. Before the spring and autumn period, the north and south confronted each other and fought for this place as their stronghold. By controlling the Spring Lake, they could sail down the east and conquer the world like a lion hunting a rabbit. In the past, when the north wanted to drink the horses of the southeast, or when the south wanted to send troops to the north, they had to pass through the 800 miles of Spring Lake, 3 cities, 3 passes, and 3 mountains. The 3 cities were the most important: Xiangfan, Xingyang, and Wuling. In terms of the world, Xiangfan was the most important. In terms of the southeast, Xingyang was the most important. In terms of our prefecture, Wuling was the most important. Xianxia was always said to be the backbone of the world. When the three kingdoms were fighting here, Wang Mingyang, an old minister of West Chu, accepted the order and became the governor of Xianxia. He resisted Su Zhao's 100,000 soldiers and defended for 3 years. When West Chu was destroyed and West Shu was forgotten, this scholar from Shangyin Academy still refused to surrender. The city ate people and Wang Mingyang personally cooked his wife and children. 3 years later, the city was breached and less than 10,000 people were left in Xianxia. It became a ghost city. It was said that 10 years after the city was breached, there were still hundreds of thousands of wandering souls that refused to leave the city and howled every night. The dynasty had no choice but to send the Taoist master of Longhu Mountain to Xianxia to set up the great Zhou Tian ceremony. The number of sacrificial offerings reached a shocking number of 36,500, which was an unprecedented feat. This battle allowed Wang Mingyang to win the title of the #1 defender of the spring and autumn period. Even Su Xiao admired him. Wang Mingyang was a famous person, but he dragged 200,000 people down with him. Even after 1,000 years, Wang Mingyang would still be a controversial figure. Yu Yuwei was frightened. "We're not going to Xianxia, are we?" Su Fengyan had recently been habitually flicking his fingers. He probably did it thousands of times in a day. He was probably obsessed with practicing the blade. He laughed softly. "I wanted to go, but if you don't dare, then we'll go straight to Wuling." Yue shook her head. Su Fengyan suddenly heard cries and screams coming from the back of the boat. Yue just happened to hear the legend of 100,000 resentful spirits in Xianxia. Her heart trembled, and she finally realized that she was at the bow of the spring god lake. Her face was full of self-mockery. Su Fengyan ignored Yu Yue and rushed to the bow of the boat. He saw a boatman rolling on the ground with a bloody arm. 2 scarlet young Kuei were growling at him. Lu Qiantang went up to His Royal Highness and told him what happened. It was a trivial matter. The young Kuei were frolicking and running, and they probably bumped into the boatman. Su Fengyan frowned. The tiger Kuei was an ancient beast, and it ate people when it was hungry. Su Fengyan squatted down, and the young Kuei seemed to feel its master's anger. It lowered its head and whimpered, and its skin immediately turned from red to black. Su Fengyan was not arrogant, and with a flick of his finger, he hit the boatman. A hole was made in the wall of the boat, and it fell into the lake. The elder sister Bodhisattva looked at her younger brother from the hole, and then turned around to look at Su Fengyan pitifully, as if she was pleading for mercy. Su Fengyan snorted, stood up and said, "Compensate the injured." "Oh right, ask the Phoenix Battalion to help mend the boat." In the twilight, hundreds of boats were racing on the spring god lake. It was a lively and bustling scene. The closer they were to the land of fish and rice in Jiangnan, the more they could not feel the loneliness of their hometown, Bailiang. Tonight, they would spend the night on an island in the middle of the spring god lake called Mount Lao. As they approached the island in the middle of the lake, Su Fengyan saw Jiang and I walk out of the cabin and stand beside him. He explained, this mountain was originally not called Mount Lao, but Prison Mountain. It was the place where the Queen Mother of the West imprisoned the Jade Emperor's daughter, the Spring God. Prison Mountain was not surrounded by a lake, but a basin. Later on, a demigod was so angry that he drew a circle around Prison Mountain with his sword, and it collapsed for 800 miles. Only then did the lake water gushed out. As for the saying that a demigod created the lake, of course, it was just nonsense. Nowadays, Mount Lao is filled with courtyards and pavilions, and people from all walks of life gather there. Not only are there residences of the rich and powerful, but there are also residences of monks and Taoists. There are also a few remnants of the fallen country who have been imprisoned on the island. There are also a lot of shops. When you get on the island, you can pick something that catches your eye. Jiang and I stretched out his hand. Su Fengyan was stunned for a moment and asked, "What?" Jiang and I said stiffly, "Silver." Su Fengyan laughed and said, "All right, you've already earned a few hundred taels of silver. How much do you want to take? But let me remind you, if you mention my name, who would dare to ask you for money? Why waste the manuals that you've worked so hard to earn?" Jiang and I sneered and said, "Do you think I'm a robber like you?" Su Fengyan was amused and said with a smile, "Then how much do you want?" A few hundred taels of silver? Or I can just give you a few thousand taels of gold on credit. That way, you can study for a few lifetimes. Xianxia said angrily, I only want 1 tael of silver. Su Fengnian said helplessly, do you need to be so stingy? Xianxia said with a straight face, give it to me. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and said, ask Bluebird for it later. I've never brought such a small amount of money. Chapter 145. Xianxia went straight to the cabin and took out a small account book from the book box like a thief. It clearly recorded how many when she earned from reading Taishin Sutra, Thousand Swords Materia Medica, Whale Killing Sword, etc. When and where she read each book and how many words she read each book were all recorded in detail. Until now, she had earned not only a few hundred taels as Su Fengnian said, but 1,007 taels and 34 wen. The old god of swords who only knew how to eat, drink and sleep strolled into the cabin. Xianxia, who was about to transfer 1 tael of silver from her savings, held up a brush with one hand and covered the account book with the other. Li Chungang could not do anything about this. He stood far away and let Xianxia finish her work. Only then did he carry the wine pot and sit on the table. He poured some wine on the table and dipped his finger in it. After Xianxia put the account book back into the bottom of the book box and sat opposite her, Li Chungang then used his finger as a pen and the wine as ink. He started writing on the table, one stroke after another, full of vigor and vitality. Xianxia sat upright and still, watching the old man write in one go. Half of the table was densely packed with words, like the rugged rocks at the gates of hell. After old man Li finished writing, he looked at Xianxia. The latter's face was calm. The old man seemed to really mean what he said at the beginning. He did not expect the little girl to learn anything. He wiped his sleeves and started again. This time, Li Chungang spoke. There are 3 main points in my wild grass. First, it has to be continuous and consistent. Second, it has to strive for thousands of layers. Finally, it has to be a word without fear, without emotion, without desire. Just like this wine, it can be wiped away without a trace. The first point is that one must not be lazy. Even when he is drunk, there is not a single mistake in his cursive writing. There are rules. But his daily work is enough to be meticulous. Every word is like waving a sword or a knife. One must not be careless. This old man's calligraphy has always been known as the swift snake walking snake. Looking at his words is like looking at a sword. The sword's edge is awe-inspiring. Li Chungang was talking excitedly when he saw Xianxia yawning. The ship stopped and seemed to want to go ashore. The old man with a stomach full of frustration lowered his head and took a deep breath. He sighed and muttered, "Don't waste, don't waste." He drank the wine on the table. Xianxia was used to this kind of absurd behavior of the old man. Walking out of the cabin together, he saw Su Fengnian was in the middle of a discussion with the big halberd Ningame. It seemed that more than half of the Phoenix Battalion would not go up the mountain. This was also reasonable. Not to mention whether 100 light armored soldiers could live in the mountain or not, these northern Liang soldiers themselves were too eye-catching. While Xianxia was deep in thought, old man Li was still boasting to himself about how his calligraphy had reached perfection. Jiang Ni's left ear went in and out of her right ear. She lifted her skirt with both hands and walked down the wooden plank. From the corner of her eye, she saw a young kuei scuttling ashore with a fat carp in its mouth. It seemed to be asking for credit from Su Fengnian. However, Su Fengnian only scolded it once, and the little guy immediately lay on the ground and stopped moving. Was it playing dead? Su Fengnian was just about to kick the little guy when his robe was lightly bitten by another young kuei. Only then did Su Fengnian stop. The punishment had come to an end. The siblings did not hold a grudge. They happily followed behind His Royal Highness. Seeing this, Jiang Ni's heart ached. These 2 little idiots, why were they so gentle to Su Fengnian? Su Fengnian looked back at the spring god lake. His eyes were absent-minded. He muttered, "We've arrived." The capital, Great Peace City. In the early morning, the sky was gray. 300 cavalrymen galloped over on the official road, kicking up dust. It was rumored in Jing that the king of Bailiang, Su Shao, was about to enter the city. This was the only city in the world with a population of 1 million. For a moment, the clouds were turbulent. The tall buildings on the main road were filled with all kinds of people. They just wanted to see the true face of Su Xiao. Even if they could not see him, they would be satisfied just by looking at the carriages. The scholars were impatient, the martial artists of Jianghu were uneasy, and the officials and nobles were noisy. It was rumored that there were dozens of big and small yellow doors that were prepared to block the carriages and risk their lives to angrily denounce that butcher for causing great suffering to the people. They were going to curse him for destroying the seeds of more than half of the scholars in the world. There were also rumors that there were countless Wulin heroes that were preparing to assassinate him. Even the storytellers were repeating the same old tune in the tea houses, talking about the spring and autumn war. The ear-piercing cries of cicadas rang out from countless branches in Jing. There were 4 holes in the gates of Great Peace City. All the unrelated people inside and outside the gates had been cleared out by the guards of the city gates. When the approaching cavalrymen created a roar that was 100 times louder than the cries of cicadas, when the people at the gates and on the city walls saw the bright red King Su flag, the morning that had been full of life immediately became suffocating. The cavalrymen slowly stepped through the city gates. Other than the sound of the hooves, the entire capital seemed to become silent. On the main road of the imperial palace, the spectators who had taken up good positions couldn't help but hold their breaths. When the cavalrymen moved further and further away, they looked at each other like they were relieved of a great burden. The dust had settled. 2 people came from outside the city gates. One of them was an old monk dressed in black robes. He had triangular eyes and a vicious appearance. He was like an old and sick tiger, but his expression was indifferent. The other person had a hunchback and a slight limp. He was dressed in the attire of an ordinary rich man. He raised his head to look at the city walls and smiled slightly. Then he walked through the city gates through the side hole with the black-robed old monk and some peddlers and servants who were doing business in the morning. Occasionally, there would be gazes on the old monk. The black-robed monk did not look like a benevolent monk. However, he was so old that the passers-by only glanced at him a few more times before not paying attention. As to the old man beside the old monk, he did not attract any attention. Great Peace City was the most virtuous city in the world. Even the common people in the streets claimed to have seen some great general or scholar. Who would be willing to look at a hunchbacked old man? Passing through the side hole of the city gates, the rich man and the black-robed old monk slowly walked forward. The rich man put his hands behind his back and chuckled. Bald Donkey Yang, of the millions of people in Jing, you are the only friend I have. The withered old monk said softly, if you do not touch my head, I am your friend. The rich man said that there were 2 things in the world that could not be touched. Old tigers but could not be touched, and the other was this Yang Taisui's head could not be touched. But even though he said this, he impolitely reached out to touch the old monk's bald head. The old monk did not stop him and only sighed. The rich man rubbed the black-robed old monk's bald head and roared with laughter. The black-robed old monk had an indifferent expression. This head. Qi Xianzhu had touched it in the past, and then half of the top of the lotus had collapsed. Chapter 146. The old monk in black was named Yang Taisui. He was born in Dongyue's top aristocratic family, Yang Taisui. He was studious since he was a child and read hundreds of books. When he was 13, he shaved his head and became a monk. He read the classics of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, and was especially good at yin-yang divination. Although he was a monk, he learned Taoism and military theory from the Taoist of Qingshu Temple. When he was 24, he traveled to Mount Longhu and was reprimanded by the great Shenren Qi Xian. Yang Taisui was not angry but happy. Later, he was recommended to serve the crown prince in the capital. When the world was settled, the old monk who liked to wear black declined the title of imperial advisor and studied Buddhism in Yongfu Temple. He had already cut ties with his family and had no connection with the nobles. Under the western wall, he tried to persuade Su Xiao not to kill Fang Xiaoli, but it was to no avail. Rumor had it that he cut ties with Su Xiao. In the past 10 years, he lamented the chaos of Zen Buddhism and its unclear purpose. He created a perfect theory and wrote the 8 original meanings and Vanquish and Save Lu Sutra, but he did not participate in any Buddhist debate. He called himself Old Monk Sheng. He had helped the country build, but he was willing to be lonely and only served as a study assistant for the crown prince's grandson. 3 years ago, he resigned as the Yongfu Temple's master recorder and traveled alone. Today, he appeared in Tai and city only to escort the king of Bailiang into the capital. However, after Butcher Su Xiao saw the old monk in black, he insisted on walking into the city. Su Xiao walked side by side with him towards the palace gate. Su Xiao, who was dressed like a rich man, put his hands in his sleeves and strolled leisurely on the main road of the capital. He laughed and said, "Yang Taisui, I heard you took in a disciple who went to Shangyin Academy? Let me say this first. Playing around is one thing, but if something big really happens, you and I will not interfere. Also, the Red Armor General was ordered by your disciple, right? There will be no next time. I'm very curious. The Red Armor General was already skinned by your Bodhisattva disciple Han Diaosi. How come there are 5 more Red Armor General now? You old bald donkey, what kind of sinister plan are you planning? What? Are you still throwing a tantrum with me? You're just as petty as a woman. Isn't it just because I didn't promise you not to kill those 600 scholars back then? We've exchanged our lives for decades. Do you think you can just throw it away like that?" The black-robed monk said in an old-fashioned manner, "It's none of my business." Su Xiao squinted his eyes and looked at the capital that he had not seen for many years. He curled his lips and said, "Tell me something. Is that kid the illegitimate child of that person? Otherwise, how could he have obtained the red armor from Han Diaosi, and how could he have made Han Diaosi, this human cat, become a submissive slave?" The old monk frowned. He was already a ferocious god to begin with, but now he looked even more ferocious. He was awe-inspiring even without being angry. He walked through the crowded streets, but with the old monk leading the way, no one could get close to him and Su Xiao. They were like fish in water. Su Xiao smiled and said, "Since Bald Donkey doesn't deny it, I'll take that as an answer." The black-robed old monk still did not explain or refute. His state of mind was as calm as an ancient well. Su Xiao joked, "Yang Taisui, oh Yang Taisui, sometimes I admire you. Being in the king's company is like being in the tiger's company. As long as you live for another 20 or 30 years, you'll have the hope of assisting the dragon for 3 more dynasties. Everyone will be happy to treat you like a bodhisattva. Look at Mount Longhu. In order to consolidate the position of the imperial advisor, they will do anything. There's an old guy who gave up 2 years of his lifespan and even went against the heavens to change his fate. You, on the other hand, don't do anything. Bald Donkey, when are you going to meet my eldest son, Fengyan? He's different from me, he's a Buddhist. Maybe you'll get along." The old monk shook his head and reminded him softly, "We're here." At the end of the road, they could see the gate of the South Imperial City. According to the law, there was an early morning court session every 10 days. However, the morning court session had already begun and Su Xiao had arrived a little late. There were only carriages and servants outside the door. He did not see any dignitaries of the imperial court. This was the first gate of the imperial city. There were 3 watchtowers with huge eaves and ridges. On the left and right of the gate, there was a pair of white jade lion and dismount steels. On the gate, there was a couplet written by the founding scholar, "The sun and moon are bright, the mountains and rivers are majestic." There were 110 corridors on the left and right of the gate. They were known as the 1,000-step corridors, connected to the eaves and ridges. They surrounded and protected the Baohe Palace, which was also known as the Golden Imperial Hall. The black-robed old monk, Yang Taisui, sighed and said, "You're going to attend court dressed like this?" Su Xiao smiled and said, "I'm going to change in the carriage. I didn't have the chance to wear it in Bailiang. I've been living like a prince these years and I've gained a lot of weight. I don't know if it fits. If I can't wear it, it'll be troublesome." The old monk had a rare expression of helplessness on his face. Chapter 147. Su Xiao laughed heartily and walked towards a carriage with only a few personal retainers of the prince's mansion left. Naturally, he could not bring the steel cavalry under the command of the prince's banner to the foot of the imperial city's wall. The black-clothed Yang Taisui did not move. He still stood 1,000 feet outside the door with a bleak expression. Back then, he was still a monk who sought fame and achievements. Su Xiao had already led 600 black-armored soldiers out of Jinzhou. He gave advice to the late emperor while Su Xiao was the emperor's vanguard. One was a scholar while the other was a warrior. They complemented each other well. At that time, the late emperor regarded the two of them as his right-hand men. They used to climb up to the Baohe Hall to drink together and talk about the chaotic world under the moonlight. Su Xiao did not study much, so he was always forced to recite poems. He was crude and vulgar and was laughed at every time. After he got drunk, he would wantonly lie down, and it did not matter who was using whose arm as a pillow. The last time they met was when Su Xiao destroyed West Chu and returned to the capital to receive the title of Dezhu State. They only talked to each other, no longer as unscrupulous as before. After that, he no longer participated in politics and only talked about Zen and poetry. After that, he was instructed by the late emperor to drink farewell wine with Su Xiao. Only then did that beautiful woman enter the palace alone with a sword and a white gown. After that, he no longer had the face to see Su Xiao. Su Xiao was not far from the carriage when a carriage galloped towards him. The coachman was sweating profusely. Su Xiao waved his hand to signal spear immortal Wang Xiu's shitty, Han Lao's Han, not to worry. He leaned to the side and barely dodged the hooves of two big horses. He only signaled a master from the prince's mansion to take a prepared outer robe from the carriage and prepare to wear it to the morning court. Su Xiao did not mind the carriage's collision. However, the coachman from the prince's mansion thought that the hunchbacked old man was an eyesore and thought that he was some blind servant of an official in the imperial court. The master in the carriage was already late for the morning court because he was unwell. The master kept urging him all the way, causing him to be scolded countless times. Of course, his mood was extremely bad. In a fit of anger, he raised his whip and smashed the coachman. Su Xiao smiled and did not move. Han Lao's Han grabbed the whip, pulled the coachman down, and stomped on his chest. With a crack, 2 ribs were broken. A middle-aged Confucian scholar wearing a 4th-rank Yunyan civil official's robe came down from the carriage. Seeing that his servant was in trouble, he flew into a rage. Looking at the unfamiliar old man, he did not care about his manners and cursed loudly. Generally, he was angrily scolding which servant dared to be so arrogant and commit such a crime outside the imperial city. He pointed at Su Xiao's nose and asked him to report the name of the official in his mansion. When he went to court later, he would personally impeach the emperor. This Confucian scholar was a 4th-rank Confucian, the same rank as the prefecture overseer. He was the son of the crown prince's left concubine and held a position in the eastern palace that made people jealous. Not only that, his father, Lu Binzhong, was the grand secretary of the Eastern Pavilion, an important official of 2 dynasties. In this dynasty, the most prestigious civil officials were the 3 halls and 3 pavilions. Although the Eastern Pavilion was at the bottom, the 3 halls and 3 pavilions were not full. Including the Wuying Palace, Wenhua Palace, and Wenyuan Pavilion, there were only 4. Lu Binzhong, as one of the 4, was an extraordinary honor. In addition, his brother, Lu Tiren, was the Yinqing Guanglu Daifu. The 3 of them were officials in the imperial court, which was a legend. Were it not for this, he would not have dared to casually speak of impeachment outside the gates of the imperial city. After all, officials who could participate in the morning court were not ordinary people. Su Xiao looked at the 4th-rank crown prince's left concubine's spittle flying everywhere and dismissed it with a smile. A retainer jumped off the carriage with a bundle and undid a corner of his court robe. The Confucian official from the Lu family glanced at it and subconsciously froze. Was this old man in front of him an official? But he had never heard of civil officials or generals wearing such a style of official robe. In this world, official robes were far more important than official manners. Once exposed and proven, the only outcome would be imprisonment and banishment. When the bundle was completely opened, the eyes of the Lu family's left concubine of the Eastern Palace widened. A python robe? That was a blue satin robe embroidered with a 5-clawed python. Since ancient times, python robes had been the robe of an elephant dragon. It was similar to the dragon robe worn by the emperor, but it lacked a claw. Like the dragon robe, the words Xianxia were embroidered on it. The current dynasty clearly states that only the princes can embroider the 9 pythons and 5 claws. Only the imperial family can embroider the bright yellow and apricot yellow colors. The dragon python has 5 different postures: curving on the water, standing upright on the water, lying on the water of the 3 rivers, lying on the water of the 5 rivers, and lying fully on the water of the 5 rivers. There are strict regulations on which postures should be used at which level. The man surnamed Lu watched the old man put on the embroidered robe with the help of the servants and swallowed his saliva. Dragon python robe. The 5 claws of the 9 dragons were 1 more claw than General Gu Jianting. The material of blue satin meant that he wasn't a member of the royal family. Was he a prince with a different surname? Counting with one's fingers, how many kings with different surnames were there in the dynasty? The old man was wearing a python robe that was unique in the entire dynasty. It was clear that he was going to attend the imperial court. What was more, other than wearing this terrifying python robe, he was also holding a saber. Who could carry a sword to court? Even if Lu was an idiot, he would know who the old man in front of him was. The king of Bailiang, Su Shao. After the hunchbacked old man put on the extravagant python robe and carried the Bailiang saber, he walked straight to the southern gate of the imperial city. The left concubine's son knelt on the ground with a thud. He no longer had any thoughts of attending the imperial court. He just kowtowed there with all his might, leaving a pool of blood on the stone floor. Su Shao, wearing a python robe, walked into the imperial city. The opening of the city gate was a little dim. After walking out, Ren Tu blocked the warm sunlight and squinted at the great hall in the distance. The 2 rows of officers in front and behind him all knelt on the ground. The eunuchs all acted as if they were facing a great enemy and yelled at the top of their lungs, "The king of Bailiang enters the palace." The hunchbacked old man limped forward slowly, as if he didn't care that there was the emperor, Grand Secretary Zhang Julu, General Gu Jiantang, and all the civil and military officials waiting there. He silently counted his steps and finally walked up the steps. Looking back at the city gate, he smiled and muttered to himself, "I'm old." Chapter 148. The person playing host on Mount Lao was a former Bailiang army officer. His military exploits were not prominent, but after entering the business world, he began to soar and become the richest in the province. Even those 10-generation aristocratic families could not compare to him. He was known for his extravagant lifestyle. He once competed with a person with an imperial merchant background in the province in terms of wealth and attracted countless curses. His saliva was comparable to half of the spring god lake. This old soldier who had led Su Zhao's horse in the past was not conspicuous at first glance. He was dressed like an ordinary person and did not have any arrogance to speak of. When he saw His Royal Highness, his eyes filled with tears and he knelt on the flat ground of the ferry. No matter how Su Fengnian supported him, he was unwilling to get up. He just knelt on the ground and sobbed. Behind him, his wife and family members were dumbfounded. Su Fengnian knew the inside story. This old man surnamed Wang was not only admiring of the king of Bailiang, but he also revered the Wang Fei from the bottom of his heart. He was one of the lucky few old soldiers in the Bailiang army who had personally seen His Royal Highness draw his blade at a young age. Although he was called a little soldier leading a horse, the Su family did not view him as a servant. The people who came from the Bailiang army had 2 extremes. They either struggled at the bottom and had a headache over the basic necessities, or they had a high position and wealth that was truly unattainable. This had to do with the dynasty's complex psychology of the Bailiang army. It was mixed with fear and jealousy, so there was a lot of rejection. This caused those who were labeled as part of the Bailiang army to hold back their resentment after losing the protection of the Iron Cavalry. It was not easy for them to put in more blood and sweat and finally achieve success. Often, their family, business, and politics would be especially cruel and ruthless. Wang Linquan, who was kneeling in front of Su Fengnian, was an example. In the Wang family, the family law was far more important than the national law. Governing the family was like governing an army. There was once a daughter-in-law who spoke carelessly and was directly kicked out of the family by Wang Linquan, regardless of the aristocratic family behind the daughter-in-law. Even her son was dragged to the ancestral hall to be whipped. Therefore, when the members of the Wang family saw the temperamental and shrewd head of the family kneeling in front of a young master, they were all scared out of their wits. The king of Bailiang and his royal highness would rest at Mount Mao midway during their travels. Naturally, only the local snake king of Mount Mao, Lin Quan, knew about this. All of this was secretly arranged by Lu Qiuer, and there was no room for error. Su Fengnian looked up at a huge jade guanyin holding a vase at the peak of Mount Mao. It was said that Wang Linquan spent millions of silver taels and took 10 years to build it. This guanyin in the pure vase stepped on a yellow dragon and had the glare of a Vajra bodhisattva. Wang Linquan finally stood up and wiped away the tears on his face. He bowed and led the way for his royal highness. His posture was the same as when he led the horse for Su Shao. Today, even if Wang Linquan was rich, he would never forget his roots. Wang Linquan saw that his royal highness kept looking at the guanyin statue at the peak of the mountain. He said softly, "Your highness, the spring lake is strange. For thousands of years, on the second day of the second month, there would be a thick column of water shooting up into the sky. That day, no one would dare to swim in the lake, so it was called the dragon raises its head. It was said that there was a dragon trapped at the bottom of the lake who was punished by the heavens for secretly making rain in Jiangnan. It deserved to be punished for 1,000 years. This dragon was not satisfied with the confinement of the heavenly court, so it purposely stirred up trouble on that day. That is why we all call that day the dragon raises its head. However, after all, the spring equinox did not cause any disturbances in the lake." Su Fengnian smiled. On the second day of the second month, the horned mansion appears. The eastern azure dragon first reveals its lofty appearance. That is when the dragon raises its head. Therefore, there is a saying in ancient books that dragons ascend to the heavens during the spring equinox. Your Highness is knowledgeable. Wang Linquan, who was rich, praised from the bottom of his heart. He was not flattering him. The status of merchants in the dynasty was not high, but at Wang Linquan's level, even if he sat at the same banquet as the prefecture overseer, there was no need for him to bow and scrape. Wang Linquan was known for his seriousness and vengeance. It was as difficult to ask him to sing praises of virtue as it was to ask him to be compassionate. As a result, once he praised someone, whether it was a scholar who had written a splendid essay or an official who cared about the people, they would all be overjoyed and very confident. "So similar," Su Fengnian said softly. "Aren't you afraid that there will be gossip in the imperial court? That it will affect your business? Earning 1 million or 10 million makes no difference to this lowly one. My children and grandchildren will have their own fortune. Since I can already provide for them to live without worry, this lowly one has no shame to my ancestors," Wang Linquan said with a smile. "You are rather open-minded." Su Fengnian retracted his gaze and teased. "It's all superficial knowledge that I learned from the great general and Wang Fei. I can't live up to your highness's open-mindedness." Wang Linquan's face was full of shame. The courtyard of the Wang family residence was deep, with pavilions and terraces, small bridges and flowing water. It was a scene of Jiangnan's misty rain. The residence was still some distance away from the peak of the mountain, requiring 15 minutes on foot. After arranging accommodations for Yu Yuwei and the others, Su Fengnian and Bluebird headed for the White Jade Guanyin constellation. Wang Linquan had his youngest daughter, Wang Chudong, lead the way. This 28-year-old girl who was born in Jiangnan wore a gown that revealed half of her soft bosom. Her upper chest and back were bare, draped in a transparent gauze. Her undergarments were faintly discernible. The quality of the silk brocade was extremely exquisite and gorgeous. This sort of dress was originally only popular in Dongyue. Now that it had been accepted by the noble women of the dynasty, and the famous poets had contributed charming phrases such as, "leaving the white snow on the bosom for a long time," the dress became more and more popular, and the girl's posture gradually became bold and unrestrained. Chapter 149. Wang Chudong, the unbetrothed daughter of a rich family, stared at Su Fengnian with her eyes wide open. She was not shy at all. Now, she was chattering non-stop like a little oriole. Wang Linquan did not tell anyone about Su Fengnian's identity, so she only knew that the handsome young man in front of her was surnamed Su. She kept calling him young Master Su, and in the end she just called him Brother Su. Su Fengnian did not mind. He smiled and listened to the little girl's clear voice. His mind was peaceful. Finally, they came to the square where the pure vase guanyin stood. The white jade guanyin had angry eyes and lowered eyebrows. It was vivid. Her right elbow was facing the spring god lake. She stretched out her 5 fingers and her palm was facing forward. It was as if she was giving charity without fear. Su Fengnian sat down with his legs crossed. The 2 young Kuei were lying on his knees. The little girl, who was known as the daughter of the Wang family, squatted beside him and said sincerely, "Brother Su, guanyin is amazing." She stood there and pointed to the spring god lake. During the spring equinox, there were no more water columns in the sky. When I was young, I was especially afraid of the 2nd day of the 2nd month. It was always thundering and raining. After I had guanyin, I could sneak to the lake to fish, brew tea, and enjoy the snow. Brother Su, let me test you. Do you know what guanyin's hand gestures are? Su Fengnian, who was well versed in Buddhism, raised his head and smiled. Fearless Madra. Wang Chushue giggled. Correct. She saw that young Master Su was in a daze after he finished speaking. She was bored to death. She turned her head and inadvertently saw young Master Su's maiden green with tears in her eyes. She said in surprise, "Brother Su, why is this sister crying?" Su Fengnian came back to his senses and said softly, "Because this guanyin bodhisattva looks like a person." Wang Chushue responded with an "oh," and considerately stopped nagging. Jiang and I and the old god of swords Li Chungang also came to the square. Old man Li looked at it deeply and muttered, "This guanyin bodhisattva's fearless madra can be seen as a sword. The sword will is unparalleled." Jiang and I said calmly, "I don't understand." Old man Li was dispirited. He glanced at Su Fengnian, who had a strange expression on his face, and asked curiously, "What's wrong with that kid?" Jiang and I hesitated for a moment, then lowered his head and said, "This goddess guanyin looks very much like the king of Bailiang's consort." The old god of swords was silent for a long time before reciting, "Walking alone, stopping alone, sitting alone, the green snake in my hand glides over the white line. One man, one gown, one sword, the tip of the sword giving off 3,000 rays of light. No one in this world can recognize me, they can only laugh like a madman. Only the mountain ghost and the dragon king know that an immortal is in front of them." Jiang and I frowned. "You wrote the poem?" The old man smiled and said, "Back then, people praised this old man's song of the Azure Dragon Sword God. This is only a short section. If you want to listen, let this old man think about it." Jiang and I said unhappily, "Don't think about it. I don't want to hear it." Wang Linquan had mobilized a large force to prepare a sumptuous banquet and personally came to invite His Highness Shitsi back to his residence. Even the Northern Liang light cavalry on the 3 large ships were not left behind. The female servants carrying the food boxes came in an endless stream, smoothly delivering them to His Highness. Su Fengnian left the mountaintop. At the dining table, he was especially full of praise for the spring god lake's specialty, stewed black chicken and turtle. The black chicken from Mount Mao was reared in the mountains. There were many herbs in Mount Mao, so the meat had a medicinal fragrance. Its skin, flesh, bones, and mouth were all black. The turtle was the specialty of the spring god lake. It had to be over 100 years old. The turtle's shell was buried at the bottom of the lake all year round. Only those that grew an inch of green whiskers could be considered to have lived for 100 years. It was slowly stewed with the black chicken until the turtle's shell was tender. It was no wonder that the scholars and refined scholars highly praised it. After eating heartily, they praised it, "You can't throw away the spring god, but half of it is this soup." Wiping away the grease on his mouth, Su Fengnian ate the most comfortable meal since he left Bailiang. He was finally full. In private, he asked Wang Linquan for the geography of his province. At dusk, he was enjoying the cool breeze in the courtyard. Jiang and I was reading a book that had never appeared in the world before, The Flying Sword of Dunhuang. It was interesting to say that this swordsman of the Beimeng dynasty had just achieved great success in the Dunhuang sword cave in the extreme north. Just as he was about to use his sword to travel the Jianghu, he encountered Wang Xiu, who was practicing his spear in the north. He was cleanly killed by a single spear strike. It was not that the swordsman's strength was weak, but rather that he had built a chariot behind closed doors. His swordsmanship was like a castle in the air, and he lacked the sharpness of a real battle. Fortunately, the nameless swordsman had been practicing his sword while writing his insights. Only then did he come up with this immortal-like, the flying sword of Dunhuang. At first, Su Fengnian chose this book because he felt that the name was domineering. He did not expect that the old god of swords would be so picky and only said that this book was passable. Li Chungang said that it was passable, so Su Fengnian did not dare to treat it carelessly. Jiang and I opened his mouth to read, while Su Fengnian closed his eyes to listen. Su Fengnian remembered that Li Chungang had said that he would fight against Lu Qianteng. It was time for him to give it a try. He did not want to learn from the swordsman who wrote The Flying Sword of Dunhuang and die prematurely just after entering the Jianghu. Why would Su Fengnian risk injury to go to sword maniac Wang Xiaoping's purple bamboo forest to ask for a beating when he was practicing his blade on Mount Wudong? Wouldn't it be easy and comfortable to just stay under the waterfall and practice his blade? Although there were many martial artists in the world, the highest level seemed to be high up in the clouds. Not to mention the Diamond Finger, Celestial Phenomenon, and Immortal Realm, the division of the 9 levels below the 3rd level was very simple. The amount of armor that was broken was the strength of the level. If the armor was broken but not broken, it would be the lower 3 levels. Whether or not the armor could be broken was the first threshold. This armor was the standard iron plate armor of the dynasty. There were 2 layers in the front and back. The middle 3 levels could break the armor, but they were all below the 6th level. Therefore, the 6th level was the second big hurdle for martial artists in the Jianghu. The 3rd level of the upper 3 levels could break the armor, but it was hard to say for sure if the 1st or 2nd level could break the armor. It was rumored that Heavenly Master Zhao of Mount Longhu in the capital could break through 100 armor with one blow of his horsetail whisk. Su Fengnian asked Jiang and I to wait for a while he went to fetch the sword case. Inside the case was the great Liang Dragon Sparrow sword. The owner of this sword had once broken 160 armor with one blow. Chapter 150. The big sword case in Su Fengnian's hand was made of 1,000-year-old red sandalwood. The case itself was priceless. Red sandalwood had always been shipped over by sea. The great eunuch Han Diaoxi had gone out to sea several times, and to a large extent, it was to load fine sandalwood for the imperial family. Even so, the imperial craftsman's office did not hesitate to buy sandalwood from the south. Back in the day, West Chu was the craziest in purchasing red sandalwood. It was said that all officials did not bring sandalwood. For example, Su Fengnian, the imperial uncle of the former Taiping princess, was even more outstanding. He was incomparably elegant and built a well-known sandalwood building. Unfortunately, in the end, almost the entire building was moved to Great Peace City. Su Fengnian used a piece of silk to wipe the sword case. It was said that raising a jade was like raising a person. In that case, the precious red sandalwood was like a pretty girl from a humble family. It needed to be wiped frequently to avoid dust. Once this piece of red sandalwood was wiped, it was glossy and smooth. There were faint traces of purple gas lingering around it. Su Fengnian was listening to the flying swords of Dunhuang calmly. Suddenly he heard Jiang and I burp. The little clay man paused for a moment and seemed to be embarrassed. Su Fengnian teased, "Deduct 10 coins." Jiang and I was furious. Just as he was about to speak, an embroidered bamboo ball was thrown high. Blue Bird flew to the top of the wall and caught it, not letting it fall into the courtyard. Su Fengnian had heard laughter in the distance. It must be the Wang family playing Kuju. Now that the Liang dynasty was at its peak, it naturally had an open mind. Kuju was originally a game from Beimeng. After it spread to Liang, it was not banned. Very quickly, it became a favorite among women. There were not many restrictions on women in the current dynasty. They could go hiking, form associations, ride horses, shoot arrows, swing, play polo, and wear Beimeng clothes. Everything was possible. This was why Wang Chudong was so bold and unrestrained today. If it was 20 years ago, this would have been unimaginable. The trend was irresistible. Even the old-fashioned great scholars could not do anything about it. Moreover, the great scholars all had their own families, so they simply turned a blind eye to it. It was not difficult to talk about big principles with the people, but it was difficult to talk about small principles with their wives and daughters. Su Fengnian took the bamboo ball from Bluebird and asked her to put the sword case back into the room. As expected, someone knocked on the door very quickly. Su Fengnian saw the expected young girl. He returned the bamboo ball and asked with a smile, "Who kicked me just now? What a strong kick." Wang Chudong stretched out her slender finger and tapped her nose. She was very pleased with herself. She had a lively personality and was not good at painting, but she was very good at swings, kuju and polo. However, during the banquet, Wang Linquan seemed to be very proud of his youngest daughter's poetry. Su Fengnian really could not see how this little girl could be so good at writing. Moreover, with his second sister Su Weisheng and the female scholar Yan Dongwu in front of him, even the little clay figurine wrote the majestic, Daging Horns Swearing to Kill post. Su Fengnian did not think that any girl could enter his eyes in terms of poetry, calligraphy and painting. At this time, Wang Chudong had changed her clothes. She was wearing a narrow-sleeved robe, black boots and breeches, and a belt around her waist. Su Fengnian looked much more comfortable. A young girl who was imitating a married woman revealed half of her breasts. She was putting the cart before the horse. Where did the charm come from? That dress was more suitable for Shu Xiu to wear. Wang Chudong asked tentatively, "Let's play kuju together?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "No, I have to go to the market." Wang Chudong was excited when she heard this. She vowed solemnly, "Let's go together. I will bargain." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile. He let Bluebird call Yu Yue and the others. He then threw a glance at Jiang and I. The latter hesitated for a moment, but still decided to follow. She was unfamiliar with the place and the people. The main thing was that she did not have any concept of money. She really did not know what 1 silver could do. In the group, other than Su Fengnian and Bluebird who was like his shadow, there was also Jiang and I and Li Chungang, the 3 retainers, Lu Yangshu and Ning Amei who had taken off his heavy armor and put on casual clothes. The bow-shaped iron halberd was also placed on the boat. Wang Chudong was kicking the bamboo ball along the way. Her movements were skillful and nimble. Her figure was like a swallow. It was very beautiful. When they arrived at the slightly deserted market, Su Fengnian did not expect that there would be a Qingfu silk shop on Laoshan Island. It was just nice to buy some clothes for Yu Yue and some dispensable rouge and face powder. Su Fengnian was generous and did not give Wang Chudong a chance to bargain. The little girl was unhappy. There was a lakeside tea house in the market with an excellent view. The water vapor of the spring god lake was rising and the fog was lingering. It was originally an excellent place to produce good tea, but it was only in recent years that the spring god tea became a tribute. Su Fengnian and Wang Chudong went to the top floor. Jiang and I and Old Man Li were still wandering around the market. Yu Yue and Shu Xiu were shopping together. In the end, only he and the Wang family's daughter were seated. Ning Amei, Lu Qiantang and Yang Qingfeng formed a triangle. There were no tea guests upstairs, so it was unusually quiet. The owner of the tea house obviously recognized Su Fengnian and directly took out the best spring god tea. Wang Chudong volunteered to make tea for Su Fengnian. Her technique was mysterious, and her every movement was full of the style of a master. This made Su Fengnian have a whole new level of respect for her. The tea leaves that were picked before the Qingming festival curled up like a green conch or a sparrow's tongue. There was a layer of even fine white fluff on the edge. The green tea was gently poured into the water, like the bottom of a lake in spring. Su Fengnian waited patiently. The little girl's tea was very pleasing to the eye. After Wang Chudong offered a cup of tea with both hands, she said seriously, "Generally, when the tea leaves are drunk for a few times, the fragrance will gradually fade. However, the spring god tea will gradually become better. The spring god tea of our Laoshan Island is better than the surrounding areas. The tea garden can only plant bamboo, plum, orchid, laurel and green pine. It is not suitable to mix it with an evil tree. Therefore, the spring god tea of Laoshan Island has a long fragrance, but it doesn't have the fertile soil and green leaves. Chapter 151. Su Fengnian took a sip, but he couldn't tell what it was. He had never been interested in drinking tea, but now that he was at the spring god lake, he couldn't explain why he didn't drink the spring god tea. He thought of a poem. It was this poem that turned the spring god tea, which was kept in the house, into a tribute. It was very similar to his second sister's poem, Brother Appreciating the Snow, which inadvertently heated up the green ant wine, which was only famous in Baelyang. He subconsciously recited, "Since ancient times, those who know of this tea are few and far between." When a May 15 plucked, a snow-breasted green jade steamed. Wang Chudong blinked and asked with a face full of expectation, "Is this poem good?" Su Fengnian casually said, "It's pretty good. I've always admired heroes who can write poems. But it would be even better if I could see a young girl plucking the tea with my own eyes." Snow-breasted green jade steamed. Listen, it's so poetic. Wang Chudong's face turned slightly red. Su Fengnian was confused and asked, "What's wrong?" Wang Chudong's ears were completely red. She didn't say anything and only lowered her head to drink her tea. A few young men and women came to the top floor of the restaurant. They were all dressed in brocade and each one was more arrogant than the other. The leader of the group was a young official with an official's aura. When he saw Wang Chudong, his expression changed and he walked straight over. Just as he was about to strike up a conversation, he was stopped by Lu Qiantang. Wang Chudong frowned and whispered, "This person is Lieutenant Zhao's son. He's idle and uneducated. He's very domineering and annoying." Su Fengnian didn't suppress his voice. He squinted his eyes and smiled. "Lieutenant? What rank is he? Is he a third-rank official?" Wang Chudong couldn't help but smile. Her eyes were full of spirit. The gloominess and irritation she felt were swept away. She cooperated and said, "Not really, not really. He's only a fourth-rank official." However, she was still a descendant of a rich family who grew up in the dangerous bureaucracy. She wasn't ignorant of the ways of the world. She quietly reminded, "This guy's sister is married to the prefecture overseer as a concubine. The people around him are all sons of Qingzhou's big families. Let's just ignore them." The fourth-rank general's son had always admired the Wang family's youngest daughter. Her father, Wang Linquan, was the richest man in Qingzhou. He was known as the Hall of Gold and Jade. Half of Mount Lao was the Wang family's private property. They were also involved in the most profitable salt and iron business. Wang Linquan especially doted on his daughter. He hated that he couldn't pick the moon for her. Back then, when he was competing with others to show off his wealth, Wang Linquan covered the pond in Mount Lao's residence with a glass mirror that was worth 10 gold. He invited Qingzhou's high officials and dignitaries to admire the moon together. He and his father were present at the scene and were stunned. Furthermore, Wang Chudong, this little girl, wasn't simple. When she was young, there were several eminent monks and Taoist masters who read her fortune. They all said that this girl was indescribably honorable. The popular spring divine tea came from her mouth. It was said that even the imperial concubines in the palace were full of praise and personally told His Majesty the Emperor. Thus, the spring divine tea became a tribute. The dandy surnamed Zhao, who relied on his elder sister to enter the Dragon Gate and was able to do whatever he wanted in Qingzhou, saw LV Qiantang's evil dog blocking his way. Although this young master who was used to wearing fine clothes and riding a horse had a sword at his waist, the sword was only for decoration. Secondly, the guy who could drink tea with Wang Chudong most likely had a good background. He was not stupid enough to draw his sword at a disagreement. If dandy were to kill each other indiscriminately like this, the world would be in chaos. Thus, he squeezed out a smile and prepared to test the waters. He pretended to be familiar and said with a smile, "Chudong, who is this friend?" Who knew that Wang Chudong bluntly said, "Who are you to call Chudong? I'm not familiar with you." Su Fengnian, who wished for the world to be in chaos, nodded his head and said, "Yes, Chudong is only familiar with me." The two looked at each other and smiled. This tacit understanding was too much of a slap in the face. The dandy surnamed Zhao said gloomily, "Wang Chudong, don't think that I can't touch your father." Wang Chudong clenched her teeth. Just as she was about to poke this fox borrowing the tiger's might, Su Fengnian frowned and said, "You are the son of the king of Jing and Zhaoheng?" Everyone was dumbfounded. What was this? Why did it involve the king of Jing'an? The dandy of Qingzhou couldn't help but look at each other. The dandy surnamed Zhao, who had the same surname as the 6 kings, but had no relationship with them, laughed and said, "You dare to call the king of Jing'an by his name?" Su Fengnian wasn't interested in drinking tea. He just wanted to sit here and enjoy the scenery. He didn't expect to meet these idiots who ruined the scenery. He looked at Lu Qiantang indifferently. The latter didn't say anything and kicked the dandy surnamed Zhao to the wall. The people who only bullied others and had never been bullied hurriedly helped their accomplices and left the tea house. What else could they do? They could only call the servants to gang up on them. If they couldn't beat them, they could only use their parents' family. How could Su Fengnian, who was cursed as the leader of Bailiang, be unfamiliar with this? Wang Chudong slightly opened her mouth. The sparrow tongue in her mouth was more delicate than the one in the cup. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Drink tea, drink tea." Wang Chudong, in turn, comforted Su Fengnian. She raised a bright and carefree smile and said softly, "It's okay. Even if the sky falls, my father will hold it up." The little girl seemed to have forgotten that her father had knelt in front of the dandy in front of her. Su Fengnian drank a mouthful of tea. Wang Chudong moved her little head closer and said mysteriously, "I'll take you to the lake, but you can't go back and tell my father." Su Fengnian agreed and was pulled downstairs by Wang Chudong. They went to a secluded place by the lake. The little girl stood on a rock and whistled a series of times. Su Fengnian waited and waited. After waiting for half a cup of tea's time, he still didn't see any movement. Wang Chudong was a little embarrassed. She blushed and said, "Maybe it's still napping. It's the same as me. It loves to sleep." Chapter 152. Su Fengnian saw that Wang Chudong's cheeks were swollen and red, but she still did not give up. She looked very cute. He stood on the cliff by the lake, the cool breeze brushing against his face. He was wearing a white robe with wide sleeves, and there was a red sandalwood hairpin in his hair bun. He stood with his hand on the knife, looking even more handsome. Wang Chudong carefully stole a few glances, but she always felt that she could not see enough. This girl was probably going to have her first awakening of love. She was born in a rich family where pearls were as valuable as earth, gold, and iron. Since she was young, she was the moon surrounded by stars. Moreover, the masters all said that the little girl was extremely honorable. Wang Linquan, who was strict with his family, was only obedient to this daughter. The rest of her brothers and sisters also doted on her. With so much love, Wang Chudong was able to write Spring Tea without any worries. At the time, she was only 6 years old. When she was 14, she wrote The First Snow in the East Wing that made countless daughters of noble families shed tears. Scholars praised this poignant novel as the first snow in the East Wing, especially at the end of the story where a girl said that she hoped all the lovers in the world would be married. Just this sentence alone was better than 1,000 books. Although it was wantonly criticized by the great scholars of Jiangnan for not conforming to etiquette and misleading children, and there were also people who suspected that this novel was written by Wang Linquan, the 10-year-old girl who did not leave the spring god lake was always so maverick. She always liked to sleep and play. When she was tired from playing on the swing, she was in a good mood, so she wrote a few hundred words of the epilogue of The East Wing. It was rumored that as long as Wang Chushue started writing, no matter how many words she wrote, they had to be sent to the palace on horseback to be handed over to the concubines who were obsessed with The East Wing. There was also a secret rumor that after Wang Chushue wrote to the death of the beauty who said the famous sentence, a concubine in the palace wrote to her with tears in her eyes, begging her to be merciful and not be so heartless. However, little Wang Chushue was not soft-hearted and firmly did not change a single word. When The Eastern Wing was finally published, it was the festive spring festival, so much so that none of the young ladies and madams in Qingzhou smiled that year. Many envious scholars, who had studied the books of the sages for decades but could not make a name for themselves, called it a once-in-100-years strange event in the literary world. A scholar who was good at writing erotic poems in the boudoir did not hesitate to consider himself half a descendant of Wang Dongxiang. He highly praised the book, Dongxiang, and said that this book described the love between men and women and did not leave any room for future generations. That poet was in his 50s, yet he was bowing and scraping to a girl who was not even 18 yet. Naturally, he had a mixed reputation. But after such a commotion, his originally mediocre reputation did indeed grow with the help of Wang Dongxiang. It was Su Fengnian who did not understand this. Otherwise, with his temperament of buying poems at a high price, how could he look down on this innocent and unaffected little girl standing next to him? It must be known that the person standing next to him was a contemporary female literary giant. Perhaps His Royal Highness would shamelessly ask for a few good poems. Since they were familiar with each other, he could ask for a friendship price. Su Fengnian saw that Wang Chuxue finally did not have the strength to whistle anymore. She lightly patted her cheeks as if she wanted to persevere. Su Fengnian could not help but joke, "Your friend lives in the water?" Wang Chudong nodded and said seriously, "On the day I was born, it woke up from the bottom of the lake and crawled to my door. Father said that it would be my lifespan. When I grow up around Qingming, I will find it to play." Su Fengnian curiously asked, "A turtle? Or is it a flood dragon?" Wang Chudong blushed and said, "How could a flood dragon crawl to my house? It is a big turtle with a wordless tablet on its back. It looks like a big turtle and is very stupid. The experts said that it was the divine beast that guarded the sea when you the Great was controlling the flood. When I was young, I sat on its back and swam up the spring god lake. When it was happy, it would dive into the water and almost drown me." Su Fengnian was shocked and said, "Wang Chuxue, not bad. I didn't know that you were so talented. I used to know a Taoist priest who rode a green ox on Mount Wudong. You were even better. You are already riding a big turtle." Wang Chudong smiled and revealed a pair of small canine teeth. She was obviously very proud, but pretended to be modest and said, "It's just so." The waves suddenly splashed and a huge monster appeared on the lake. Its shell was 20 feet wide and it carried a big tablet. In Shuo Wenjie, it was recorded that the turtle was the biggest of the beetles. Su Fengnian carefully read a brief introduction to the scenery of Shenzhou and Tianlushiu because of the snow-white spear falcon. The latter's dragon breeding chapter had a detailed description of the turtle. Turtles like to sleep, especially the Kuei turtle. They did not come out of the water unless it was in a chaotic time. Now, with the Kuei turtle that was chopping the waves, Su Fengnian had 6 Fengnian and a pair of young Kuei. As for the divine creatures that he had heard of, the top one was the red-crowned crane left by the sword immortal Lu Zhu on Mount Wudong and the black tiger that listened to Qi Xuanzhen scriptures for more than 10 years. Su Fengnian hugged Wang Chushue's slender waist and floated down the cliff to the turtle's back. The little girl could swing up to 3 stories high. The onlookers were all shocked, so of course they were not afraid. Su Fengnian stood on the turtle's back and thought it was ridiculous. He looked at the tablet and found it was really blank. The turtle's ancestor was so huge that it was like a small boat. Su Fengnian estimated that it would be fine even if a dozen strong men stood on it. Tianlu Xiu mentioned that riding the Kuei turtle with a tablet could lead to the celestial mountain on the sea. The emperors of the past dynasties had spared no effort to find its trace in the rivers and lakes. The leader of the eunuchs, Han Diaosi, went to the sea to buy sandalwood. He might have the intention to find the celestial mountain. Wang Chuxue squatted on the turtle's back and patted its head affectionately. She said, "Big Black, let's go play in the middle of the lake. Remember not to be seen." The turtle slowly swam in the lake as steady as Mount Tai. Su Fengnian said softly, "Chuxue, you shouldn't let other people know that you can attract the camel tablet turtle. Otherwise, it will cause trouble." Wang Chuxue, who was hitting the turtle's head, turned her head and said, "You are not an outsider." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "We just met for the first time. How can I not be an outsider? I really wonder why you haven't been abducted by others until now." Wang Chuxue made a face and said, "I know you are His Royal Highness, Su Fengnian. Other than the ancestors of heaven and earth, only the great pillar state can make my father kneel. The last one is you. I'm not stupid." Su Fengnian was relieved. He always felt uneasy when someone was trying to please him for no reason. No matter how handsome he was, it was unlikely that a young girl would fall in love with him at first sight. If it was because Wang Linquan had been beating around the bush for more than 10 years, it would make sense. With Su Fengnian's temperament, he must have made up his mind to stay with Wang Chuxue and leave Ning Mei and the others aside. Su Fengnian had a headache and said, "Then you dressed like that at the ferry in the morning. Did you want to prove whether that infamous His Royal Highness is really greedy for women's plump bodies?" Wang Chuxue didn't hide it. She nodded with a smile and said, "It's okay. Your eyes are just a little strange. You don't look like a lot of good-for-nothings who come to Mount Lao to play. Those silk dresses, thin blouses, and silk underwear were all borrowed from my big sister. I thought I would look good in them. Alas." Su Fengnian bent down and rubbed the little girl's head. He comforted her and said, "They are ugly, but when you grow up, you will look good in them." Wang Chuxue, who was squatting, said with a bitter face, "I won't grow tall." Su Fengnian laughed and took 2 steps back. He leaned against the stone tablet and felt a chill on his back. He placed the embroidered winter-spring thunder on his knees and looked at the night view of the lake. The 800-mile-long spring god lake seemed peaceful now, but it was hard to imagine that it was full of smoke and fire in the past. Some people were heroic with their feathered fans and silk headscarves, while some were dejected and defeated dogs. One could reach the ghost town of Xianxia by boat on the lake. Who was the 36,050 grand ritual of the cycle for? The court only heard of the king laughing when he won, and never heard of the defeated crying. Take the girl's father, Wang Linquan, for example. If he didn't have a treasure bowl in his hand, no one would have bothered to find out that Wang Linquan was the one who led Su Zhao's horse. It was interesting to say that few people in the Bailiang army had a good ending, but those who led the horse for the butcher were mostly rich and powerful. While Su Fengnian was lost in his reverie, Wang Chuxue had finished fooling around with the big turtle, so she sat facing His Highness in a daze. They sat opposite each other. He had a pair of knives on his knees, and she, who was only 28 years old, wrote, "First snow in the eastern wing," with a brush and a knife. Su Fengnian, who lived in northern Liang and had never heard of the eastern wing and the little prince's eastern wing, naturally didn't know that the character of the desolate woman in the book was the girl in front of him. Su Fengnian suddenly asked, "Wang Chuxue, since you are friends with the big turtle, why didn't you hold back when you were eating the black chicken stewed with turtle? I saw that you ate the most happily at the table." Chapter 153. Wang Chuxue pretended to be confused and looked to the side. She blushed and didn't dare to look at Su Fengnian in the eyes. She was so cute. Generally speaking, the bigger the turtle, the older the smaller it was. It was the best in winter, followed by spring and autumn. The worst was the summer turtle, which was considered as a mosquito by the gluttons. However, the turtle in the spring god lake was a special case. The older it was, the better it was. Wang Chuxue, the greedy girl, didn't hesitate at all. She moved her chopsticks quickly. Wang Linquan looked at her several times but didn't get any response. Su Fengnian found it funny. He was disgusted by her dress, but after the meal, he liked her a lot. Women were straightforward, innocent, and beautiful. No matter how beautiful a woman was, if she acted coquettishly, it would be a death sentence in Su Fengnian's eyes. Wang Chuxue seemed to want to change the topic. She didn't hesitate to use her trump card. She whispered, "The stone tablet Dahe is carrying has a lot of ancient characters in Xiaozhuan, but I can't understand them. I checked many ancient books and barely recognized a few sentences. It seems to say that there is a spirit mountain in the east of the East Sea. If someone learns this technique, he will be immortal. There is also a destiny, asking about divination, carrying the tomes of arcane, God's imperial ghost. As for the rest, I don't know anything about it." Su Fengnian nodded. Wang Chuxue got closer and asked, "Don't you want to see it?" Su Fengnian didn't ask as she expected. He held back his laughter and said, "I'll pretend that I don't want to see it." Wang Chuxue smiled, turned around, and patted the big turtle's head. The turtle didn't seem to be willing, so she continued to pat it. Perhaps it couldn't resist the little girl's unreasonable patting. It roared and flashed. The wordless steel squeaked. The yang side of the steel caved in, revealing the Yin scriptures on the wall. Su Fengnian stood up, squinted his phoenix eyes, and took a quick glance at the steel. He memorized it quickly. He didn't recognize any of the ancient characters, but he remembered all the characters. No wonder Su Fengnian was so snobbish. Perhaps one day, this heavenly book would be a golden ticket to avoid death. After memorizing everything, Su Fengnian pointed to his forehead and said frankly, "I've seen everything clearly. They're all hidden here." The little girl really didn't understand the viciousness of human relationships at all. She didn't take it seriously and only said with admiration, "You really have a photographic memory? My father didn't lie to me." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Why don't we also write something on the stone tablet for future generations to guess?" Wang Chushue was stunned for a moment before she clapped her hands and said, "Okay." Su Fengnian pulled out his spring thunder saber and walked to the back of the stone tablet with Wang Chushue. He asked, "What does it say?" This pair of buffoons, one was audacious to the extreme, the other rebellious. Only when they got together would they dare to do such absurd things. Wang Chushue thought for a moment and said with a smile, "How about we write that Su Fengnian and Wang Chushue were here?" Su Fengnian gave her a thumbs up and nodded in appreciation. "Why don't we add the date?" Wang Chushue smiled happily and her small canine teeth could be seen again. Su Fengnian's handwriting was good. Even if he used a saber to carve the words, the saber still moved like dragons and snakes. Especially after practicing with the saber, the momentum was even more amazing. The little girl's heart swayed as she looked at him. Su Fengnian looked at the masterpiece on the stone tablet and laughed. This was probably a magnificent feat that no one had been able to do for thousands of years, right? Su Fengnian sat down again with his back against the stone tablet. He waved at Wang Chushue and motioned for her to sit closer. The two of them were almost shoulder to shoulder. The little girl whispered, "If only you could bring a saber and enter Beimeng alone." Su Fengnian asked doubtfully, "Why?" Wang Chushue said shyly, "There's a man in a novel who did this. He used the head of the Beimeng emperor as a betrothal gift." Su Fengnian thought for a moment. "That's feasible." Wang Chushue lowered her head and said softly, "If that's the case, I'll write you 300 poems. Su Fengnian didn't think too much about it. He just smiled and said, "Then I'll still lose out. I'll have to exchange the head of a Beimeng barbarian for a poem." Wang Chushue still lowered her small head. Her side profile was graceful. Under the moonlight, the soft hair on her delicate ears could be faintly seen. Su Fengnian stretched out a finger and lifted her soft chin. He saw that her cheeks were red and her eyelashes were trembling slightly. Su Fengnian touched her lips with his finger and said frivolously, "Grow up quickly. I'll pick you again." She was pulled into Su Fengnian's arms. Su Fengnian said softly, "Why do you like me? Girl, you're really unlucky." Wang Chushue played with her fingers. Her eyes were absent-minded. "I've known you since I can remember. Father said that you'll definitely be the most amazing man in the world. I've been listening and watching from Mount Lao. It'll be the same in the future. When I grow up, will you really come back to see me? How old will I be when I grow up? I'm 16 this year. Is 17 enough?" Su Fengnian rubbed his chin against her pink face. He smiled but didn't say anything. When she spoke, her breath smelled like orchids. It was even more fragrant than spring tea. Su Fengnian thought of her sparrow tongue and felt a burst of heat in his heart. "I'll endure it. A real man is able to endure what ordinary people can't." Wang Chushue boldly reached out to touch the red mark between Su Fengnian's eyebrows. Her fingers gently rubbed against it. Su Fengnian explained with a smile, "I'm not learning how to put on makeup like you girls. It's the trace of Wudong's previous sect leader's cultivation. I've only just reached the second floor, the highest sixth floor. I have to study Taoist scriptures day and night to guide my qi. Taoism emphasizes turtle breathing, just like how this turtle seals its qi at the bottom of the lake. That's why I have to cultivate even when I sleep, for fear of squandering my qi." Wang Chushue looked up and asked, "Are you tired?" Su Fengnian smiled. "There's nothing to be tired about. It's natural to get used to it. I hope that when I travel in the future, I don't have to bring a large group of retainers to save my life. As for going to Beimeng alone like you said, I'll have to practice my knife even more. Wang Chuxue shook her head. Don't go. I'm just kidding. It's dangerous. Su Fengnian held Wang Chushue's face with both hands and lowered his head to kiss her mouth greedily and wantonly. The sparrow tongue was soft and sweet. Wang Chushue's eyes widened. He obviously didn't know anything about relationships. He wasn't the Wang Dongxiang who could write the first book about scholars and beauties. After Su Fengnian raised his head again, she slowly closed her eyes. Su Fengnian smiled. From today onwards, you're my woman. In the future, if you talk to any scholar or talent, I'll spank you. Wang Chuxue didn't move in his arms. She only said softly, kiss me again. Su Fengnian shook his head. No more kisses. Otherwise, you'll completely become a woman. Wang Chuxue opened her limpid eyes. She seemed to understand. On the banks of the Swallow River, an exaggeratedly large black and white cat sprinted out of the forest and rushed straight into the river. However, when it reached the riverbank, it suddenly stopped, and a young girl riding on the big cat was almost thrown into the river. The girl riding the cat was carrying a huge golden flower. This flower was originally called Yizhang chrysanthemum. It bloomed towards the sun and was also known as the sunflower. After the big cat stopped, the sunflower in the girl's hand shook violently. She seemed to be dissatisfied that the strange mount under her but was so timid and afraid of water. She didn't scold it and directly punched the big cat's head. The big cat, who was afraid of water to a certain extent, shook its head and pitifully looked at its owner who brought it from Shishu to Baoyang and raised it from a kitten to a big cat. The girl punched again. Although her body was thin and weak, her punch was powerful. It hit the big cat's head with a bang. She jumped off the big cat's back and came behind its butt, as if she wanted to kick it into the Swallow River. The big cat whimpered and ran away. It didn't run far. After running a short distance, it squatted on the ground, charmingly naive. The girl pointed her chin at the Swallow River, indicating that the pet should jump down voluntarily. The big cat shook its head desperately. She shook her chin again. The big cat shook its head again. The girl carrying the sunflower was expressionless and chuckled. The big cat knew that it was not good, so it rolled on the ground and begged for mercy. The girl walked closer and put the sunflower on the ground. She grabbed the big cat's foot with both hands. She didn't use much strength and carried it on her shoulder. She threw it over her shoulder into the center of the river. Then, she clapped her hands and picked up the sunflower on the ground. The big cat smashed a column of water into the sky in the Swallow River. After a while, the big cat, who was afraid of water, seemed to be enlightened. It flapped its 4 paws and swam freely in the Swallow River. It changed various positions and was very happy. The girl jumped onto the big cat's back and sat down. She commanded the rude pet that had defeated the adult tiger Kuei in Mount Qingqing to swim to the spring god lake. She was in a good mood, so she laughed. Haha. Chapter 154. Today's 2 chapters are 8,500 words. Tomorrow's first chapter will be after 12 o'clock. Admiring the moon and admiring the lake, taking liberties with the little beauty, and also carving a string of absurd characters on the stone tablet, Su Fengnian was completely satisfied. Together with Wang Chudong, he returned to Mount Lao on a turtle. Ning Mei and the others felt relieved. Returning to the Wang family's courtyard, they first sent the little girl to the small courtyard door. Seeing that there was no one around, Su Fengnian kissed her again. The girl returned to the courtyard and sat on the swing. She stood on her tiptoes and gently swayed. Wang Chudong's finger was on her lips, the corners of her mouth lifted in a smile. She thought of the many things he said. If I could walk the Jianghu just by relying on my handsome appearance, this heir apparent would have been unparalleled in the world long ago. Shameless and shameless, Wang Chudong thought about it and laughed without stopping. Su Fengnian's praise of her talent was not wrong. This girl had read a lot of books since she was a child, including the 4 books and 5 classics, and also casual books. Therefore, Wang Chudong's writing was always natural. In Qingzhou, there was a custom of writing on the 2nd day of the 2nd month. She wrote, the sound of frogs passing through the green screen, outside the building, the waves of the great river washing away the sand. Half of it was in the boudoir, but the second half took a sharp turn to show off her heroism. Therefore, when people commented on Snow on the East Wing, they all said that Wang Chudong used light ink to write strong feelings, often with hundreds of twists and turns, word by word penetrating people's hearts. She deeply understood the saint's saying, "Joy without lust, sorrow without pain." At the end of the book, may all lovers find their way together. Wang Linquan walked into the small courtyard and swung the swing for his daughter. He laughed and said, "Father was right. His Royal Highness is clearly a clever person. Like I said, the son taught by the great general and Wang Fei can't be too bad. Hey, that year His Highness was already holding a saber. Today, seeing 2 sabers in your hands, I am very gratified. Father hates seeing those self-proclaimed gentle, courteous, and thrifty Confucian scholars in Qingzhou. They are far less straightforward than His Highness. I heard you hit Commander Zhao's son in the tea house? Well done. If you don't hit them, they won't learn from their mistakes. I was just thinking of using money to make these guys see if a woman's pillow talk is more powerful than real money." Wang Chudong nodded, turned his head and said, "Father, I won't write the epilogue of East Wing." Wang Linquan sat on one side of the swing and said kindly, "If you don't want to write, then don't write. Otherwise, the concubines in the palace won't miss you as if they've been possessed." The little girl mischievously said, "There will definitely be people who will say that my talents have run out." Wang Linquan laughed heartily and said, "That bunch of poor and pedantic scholars have nothing better to do. They can't hold a brush to write a good poem. They can't mount a horse and lift a saber to kill the enemy. Why should I care about them? My daughter scolding them is already giving them a lot of face." Before Wang Linquan left, he said earnestly, "Daughter, it's still too early to make a private commitment. Wait for another 2 years." Wang Chudong, whose face was flushed red, waved his small fist. Wang Linquan came to His Royal Highness' small courtyard and knocked on the door. He saw His Highness sitting in the middle of the courtyard with a red sandalwood sword case on the table. Only the maidservant Bluebird was standing to the side. Su Fengnian was just about to get up when Wang Linquan said in a panic, "Your Highness, you don't have to get up. This old servant doesn't dare to accept." Su Fengnian didn't say much. The difference in status and etiquette couldn't be dispelled with just a few words. After Wang Linquan sat down, he carefully looked at the sword case that he didn't dare to forget for so many years. After all the old soldiers left the Bailiang army, there were a few things that they couldn't forget. When he was in the barracks, there was an invincible Su flag. Wang Linquan was a real soldier of Su Shao and was fortunate enough to see and remember more things. One of them was the sword case on the table. The sword case was hidden in the sword case. In Wang Fei's hands, it could be described as 10,000-li grieving wind, one cold sword. It was worthy of being called the first sword in the world. There was a poem in the previous generation that said, "One sword light 30 provinces, Gang Chi shooting bull." It was enough to show Wang Fei's peerless talent. Wang Linquan's eyes filled with hot tears as he looked at the sword case. These years, he was stained with the stench of money. But in the dead of the night, every time he thought about the general's ferocious army and throwing 100,000 horse whips into the river, he would be extremely excited. It was this spirit that supported Wang Linquan until today. Su Fengnian slowly closed his eyes and brushed 2 fingers across the sword case. There were 18 words engraved on the sword case. It was his mother who had personally written them. His mother was the previous sword crown of the Wu family. Although she had betrayed the family for Su Shao, many of the rules were still followed. After she passed away, the armored sword attendant Zhao Yute guarded the grave and buried the sword. It wasn't accurate to call it a cenotaph. The Wu family's sword tomb was fully deserving of being called a sword tomb. Cultivators did not respect the way of the heavens. Even if they cultivated until their hair turned white, they still couldn't enter the way of the heavens. So on and so forth. If a swordsman didn't respect or feel close to his sword, most likely his realm wouldn't be very high. Although Dong Tai, who had carried the great cauldron of swordsmanship for Li Chungang, casually carried a peach blossom branch and seemed unrestrained and not proper as an expert, Dong Tai had already made it clear that it wasn't that he disdained to carry a sword. It was just that there were very few opponents in the world who were worthy of him using a sword. Wang Xinji was one of them, and Chao Guanzi and the like were only half a match. Su Fengnian's journey this time wasn't simply to vent the resentment he'd held in for 3 years. Other than secretly drawing the geography of several thousand li, it was also to connect with Wang Linquan and the other former Bailiang subordinates. These weren't imparted to him by Su Shao, who was publicly acknowledged in the dynasty as a lovable father who never nagged Fengnian about how to act and how to conduct himself. Ren too only allowed His Royal Highness to cause trouble, and then happily cleaned up his son's mess. His Royal Highness had groups of retainers and death warriors under his command. Why did he have to practice the blade alone? He didn't really want to simply be a fierce general who charged and broke through enemy lines. For this kind of thing, he had a younger brother, Huang Manor, who was born with divine strength. In the future, Su Longxiang would carry the blade. Who could compete with him? No matter what, it wouldn't be Su Fengnian's turn. Was it for old Huang's sake? Did he want to retrieve the sword case at the top of Martial Emperor's city for the old servant who had lost his front teeth? Part of the reason was, but the most secretive was the most difficult thing for the Su family to let go of. Chapter 155. Before the Su family rushed to Bailiang, the Wangfei had gone to the palace alone. At the time, there were more than a dozen first-level aces present, half of them from the inner court and half of them from Jianghu. This was a taboo that those who knew about it kept quiet out of fear. It was a secret that had been covered in the dust of history in a short 20 years. Su Fengnian knew what the old emperor was planning. If Su Shao did not have a son, so what if he was also the king of Bailiang? Su Fengnian didn't even need to be reminded of such a clumsy emperor's scheme. The 300,000 steel cavalrymen would eventually become the property of the imperial family in the future. As for the hidden aces of Jianghu, most of them had their families destroyed when the Su family rode their horses into Jianghu. Or they were the ancestors of the 10 great clans who wanted to avenge their country and family. They had dealt a fatal blow to Su Shao when he was at his peak. Was there a better way to vent their hatred? However, they had not expected that the pregnant Wangfei would go from being a sword in the mortal world to being a sword in the mortal world. When a martial artist surpassed heavenly phenomenon and became a swordsman on land, he could no longer be measured by common sense. In the long run, both sides had suffered great losses in that battle. There was no winner. The Bailiang cavalry, who had been loyal to the dynasty, had formed an irreparable gap with the court. The Wangfei had fallen ill and died young. Su Fengnian had a book of life and death. It recorded the names of the dozen people who had appeared in the palace that day. 1/3 of them had died suddenly, none of them from old age. Su Fengnian was already 30 years old. In the future, he would want to kill these people with his own hands. Even if he could not do it in his lifetime, it was better than doing nothing. Su Shao had not hesitated to become enemies with the entire Jianghu for the sake of the court's 100 years of prosperity. Su Fengnian wanted to flatten this Jianghu even more than Su Shao. There were always some things that did not need to be explained. Su Shao could bring him 20 years of stability. When he went out, he would be escorted by armored cavalry, and there were even death warriors in the open and in the dark. However, Su Shao would also grow old one day. Su Zhao's heart was built by fighting for the country. Su Fengnian wanted to fight for the Su family and take over the Bailiang cavalry. This was not a small matter. Bailiang valued military service and revered martial arts. If he really listened to his second sister Su Weisheng and wholeheartedly took over the army, Su Fengnian did not have the confidence. Su Fengnian had been asking himself all these years, without Su Shao, what was he? Su Fengnian subconsciously tightened his grip on his swords and exhaled a long breath. Wang Linquan recalled the past and said with emotion, when the great general pacified Western Shu, military advisor Zhao was only 10 li away from the imperial city of Western Shu. Unfortunately, he died of illness. The great general led the army to break the river to comfort military advisor Zhao's soul in heaven. Who in Western Shu would not be afraid? Su Fengnian said in a low voice, the Bailiang cavalry can only fight to the death. Wang Linquan nodded. Only fight to the death. The art of war was deceitful, but Su Xiao did the opposite. No matter how aggressive his army was, the Bailiang cavalry could only fight to the death. Su Fengnian smiled. Su Xiao's visit to the capital to meet the emperor will most likely create a mess in the capital. Wang Linquan kept quiet and did not dare to speak. Su Fengnian did not mind telling this old soldier some family matters that would cause a huge uproar. Wang Linquan dared to kneel and cry at the dock in front of countless eyes. If Su Fengnian did not even have this much magnanimity, he would not be able to take over Su Xiao's horsewhip in the future. He did not even need to wander around Jianghu. It would be better for him to go back and hide in Bailiang Palace. He signaled Bluebird to bring some wine and said, "Uncle Wang, we are all family. Let's not talk about being strangers. When I came to Mount Lao this time, you openly displayed the attitude of an old subordinate of Bailiang. You are destined to be targeted by many people in Qingzhou and even the imperial court. I will tell Chu Lushan to keep an eye out for you. If things really get out of hand, I will let Su Xiao speak. I don't believe that the king of Jing and Zhao Heng, who was whacked by Su Xiao on the head with a horsewhip, will dare to offend him. As for Su Xiao coming to the capital, I guess he is going to ask for a clear result of my hereditary succession to ensure that in the future I will be able to wear a large yellow satin boa robe that will not lose to his court robes." Hereditary succession. When Wang Linquan, who usually looked old and dim-sighted, heard this, his eyes immediately lit up. Bailiang's 300,000 cavalrymen, as well as all the old subordinates scattered across the dynasty, who would not be worried about this. The meaning of the word hereditary was clear. It meant that one would inherit one's father's title, salary, and land. If one did not inherit it, then it would be a question, and it would not be changed or abolished. This was because even the vassal kings of the imperial family, other than the king of Yanxi and the king of Guangling who had great military achievements, were treated as special cases. According to the vassal clan law, all of them had to be inherited according to their seniority. For example, the king of Jing and Zhao Heng's son, without great military achievements, could only inherit the title of a lower-level prince. Once Su Fengnian was recognized as hereditary by the imperial court, he would still be the king of Bailiang. This was why there was the large yellow satin boa robe. Only the 9 and 5 Supreme Sovereign and the 9 Dragons 5 Claws could be considered an imperial yellow robe. Su Fengnian did not mind wearing the boa robe to trample the Jianghu. He just wanted to anger, scare, and beat those bastards to death. Wang Linquan only felt satisfied. At this moment, Bluebird brought over some good wine. The old man drank a cup and wiped his mouth with a smile. Now, no one in Bailiang will dare to be dissatisfied. Su Fengnian drank all the wine in his cup and said self-deprecatingly, "But I only have the ability to break through 6 ranks with 1 blade. I really can't show it." Wang Linquan said disapprovingly, "His Royal Highness is a genius. If he really wants to practice the blade, he can easily become a first-rank expert." Su Fengnian joked, "Uncle Wang, you say it so easily, but it really is not easy for me to practice the blade." Wang Linquan only cared about smiling. He silently said, "Uncle Wang," a few times in his heart. This was even more heartwarming than the wine in his stomach. Wang Linquan suddenly said with a regretful expression, "My 2 sons are useless. They only know how to study. They won't be able to lead your highness horse." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "It doesn't make sense." Wang Linquan refuted his Royal Highness for the first time. He said solemnly, "Your Highness, as long as Wang Linquan is alive, the Wang family will be at your disposal. There is no greater reason in the world than this." Su Fengnian did not know how to persuade him. He raised his cup and drank the wine in the glass again. He said softly, "I just don't know if the imperial court will take away Su Xiao's title as the pillar of the nation." Wang Linquan was silent. The 2 drank a pot of wine. Wang Linquan respectfully knelt on the ground again before he got up and left. Su Fengnian turned his head to look at the sword case. He looked at the 18 words. "This sword calms the injustices of the world. This sword does not let down the world." Chapter 156. Su Fengnian drank jug after jug, 3 jugs of wine in a row, and then fell asleep directly on the stone table. Blue Bird covered His Royal Highness with a mink coat and sat quietly on the side. Su Fengnian woke up early in the morning and saw Blue Bird sitting upright and still. He smiled apologetically, while Blue Bird smiled. Su Fengnian pulled out his xiaodong and practiced his saber in the courtyard for 2 hours. He began to try to select the most exquisite sword moves from the compendium of 1,000 swords materia medica, whale-killing sword, flying swords of Dunhuang, Green Water Pavilion sword practice record, and other secret manuals. He then integrated them into his saber art. Using the mental cultivation method of riding an ox as a foundation, he strived to merge them all into one. However, it was easier said than done to reach the pinnacle of the 50 moves that Aunt Zhao had suggested. At this moment, Su Fengnian's saber practice inevitably failed to draw a tiger and ended up looking like a dog. His saber movements were rather stagnant. Practicing like this would only yield half the result with twice the effort. However, Su Fengnian had an advantage that no one paid attention to, which was that he had cultivated an extraordinary willpower since childhood. As a child, he had copied books, as a teenager, he had played chess, and he had traveled for 3 years and 6,000 li. As His Royal Highness, he had an impetuous temperament. Otherwise, with his family's numerous lackeys and his background of owning an arsenal, how could he calm down and practice his saber? Until now, he had only broken 6 with one saber move. If it were other arrogant sons of aristocratic families, they would have stomped their feet and cursed. After sweating all over, he returned to his room and changed into the clean new clothes that Blue Bird had bought at Qingfu's satin shop yesterday. His whole body felt comfortable. Just as he was about to eat breakfast, he saw that Wang Chudong, who slept the most in the world, was up early for the first time. She stood at the entrance of the courtyard and pinched the corner of her clothes. Su Fengnian waved his hand and they ate together. Wang Chudong ate in a carefree manner. Su Fengnian wiped away the remaining food from the corner of her mouth several times. Today, Su Fengnian was going to leave Mount Lao to go to Xianxia, which was said to be the second Fengdu. As the breakfast neared the end, Wang Chudong's expression became more and more miserable. Even with her shrewdness, she couldn't hide it. Su Fengnian also didn't try to persuade her. After eating, he took the little girl to the White Jade Guanyin. When Su Fengnian told her not to see him off later, Wang Chudong was completely heartbroken. She sobbed and wiped her face like a kitten. She said vaguely, "When I grow up, remember to come back and see me." Su Fengnian flicked Wang Chudong's nose and teased, "Look, your face is covered in tears. No wonder they say that a grown girl can't be kept at home. Your father loved you for nothing." Wang Chudong, who won first place in the world, wrote in the book that the woman who loved him died. At that time, she also hid and cried secretly. However, after she was addicted to sleep, eat, and play, her tears faded. However, she didn't know that when Wang Chudong was no longer Wang Chudong and was only a young queen in the beginning of winter, not to mention parting with death, even if they were fated to meet again, it was also so heart-wrenching. She wanted to tell Su Fengnian that she might not like to sleep in the future. She wanted to ask what she should do if she missed him but couldn't see him. However, she could only cry and couldn't say anything. Su Fengnian couldn't bear to see a woman cry. He couldn't bear to hear her sobbing. He raised his voice and told her not to cry. She immediately closed her mouth obediently. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He stretched out his hands and pinched her red face. He lowered his head and touched the tip of her nose. He said softly, "Don't worry. On the way to the southeast, there will be a lot of gossip about me in Qingzhou. Just wait, there will be a surprise." Wang Chudong nodded and squeezed out a smile. "I will write a poem for you." Su Fengnian didn't take it seriously. He also promised the little girl that he would write a poem for a Beimang's head. If there really was such a day, wouldn't she be busy to death? Su Fengnian suddenly felt a little annoyed that he was too careless in leaving a mark in her heart. He remembered that Yu Yue once sang a poem, "When you're ignorant, you don't miss. Only when you miss, will you miss." Wasn't it talking about the young girl in front of him? His Royal Highness, even in the Wutong Yuan of the prince's mansion, other than Blue Bird and Sweet Potato, he didn't dare to have any feelings for the other maids. He didn't overdo it for more than 10 years. What he was afraid of was those unpredictable natural and man-made disasters. If a woman close to him withered away, Su Fengnian didn't want to bear this pain. Su Fengnian didn't know that this poem of lovesickness happened to come from Qingzhou's Wang Dongxiang's First Snow. It could be said that Wang Chudong's words came true. The group of people arrived at the dock. Su Fengnian boarded the boat and sailed further and further away from Mount Lao. Yue walked forward and whispered, "You don't know Wang Dongxiang?" Su Fengnian was baffled and asked, "Who?" Yue smiled playfully and said, "You haven't read First Snow in the East Wing?" Su Fengnian frowned and said, "When I heard Li Hanlin say that the ending was completely dead, I didn't want to flip through it. Last time when my eldest sister returned to Liangzhou, she brought a copy of East Wing with her and forced me to read it to her. It wasn't easy for me to escape." Yue lowered her head and stroked the white cat, Wu Meinyang. She said softly, "That Wang family's youngest daughter is Wang Dongxiang. From First Snow, I wish all the lovers in the world will find their way together." This sentence is even familiar to Bei Mang. Su Fengnian whispered, "No wonder." Yue raised her head and said, "Wang Dongxiang can not only write graceful poems. Although she has never traveled to the border, she can even write frontier poems with a special charm. I came to Liangzhou and didn't recite poems. Turns out Liangzhou is a magnificent literary work. Even the Great Pillar State praised this poem before." Chapter 157. Su Fengnian laughed and scolded, "Su Xiao doesn't know anything about poetry." However, His Royal Highness added softly, "But the little girl's poem is indeed a little interesting." Yue smiled. Wu Meinyang, who was getting fatter, stretched lazily in her arms. In the ghost town of Xiangfan, there was one of the 6 feudal lords. The king of Jing and Zhaoheng was one of the few princes in the imperial family who was good at both civil and martial arts, but he was neither high nor low. His literary talent was not as good as his younger brother, the king of Huainan, and his martial arts were not as good as his 2 brothers, the king of Yanlu and Guangling. Perhaps it was because he was disheartened that he began to believe in the teachings of Huang Laozi when he was young. At one point, he had thought of going to Mount Longhu to become a Taoist priest. In the last 2 years, he had abandoned Taoism and studied Buddhism. He had mustered a lot of people and had specially asked His Majesty for a special decree to go to the 2 Zen temples to burn incense. He had even taken the initiative to become a disciple of the black-clothed monk, Yang Taisui. Unfortunately, the sickly old monk had turned a deaf ear to him and had never paid him any attention. Zhaoheng was now studying the Western sect. He had 108 luan beads in his hands all year round. He was as melancholic and fickle as a woman. Su Xiao had said that Zhaoheng was as gloomy as a jealous woman. He prayed to Buddhism because he had committed too many sins in his early years. He wanted to have peace of mind. Among the 6 feudal lords, he was the least manly one. The 3 ships had not gone far from Mount Mao when 2 ships from the Spring God Lake approached them. Compared to the ship Su Fengnian was standing on, it paled in comparison. Su Fengnian squinted his eyes and looked over. The Bailiang cavalry had destroyed cities and destroyed countries with irresistible force during the Spring and Autumn War. It could be said that they were invincible. However, they were not good at naval warfare. Therefore, Su Fengnian had done a lot of research on the navies of various countries during the Spring and Autumn War. There were more than 40 types of warships of different sizes on the Spring and Autumn War, and he had dabbled in many of them. The ship in front of him was called the Yellow Dragon. In the Qingzhou Navy, it was only slightly inferior to the Green Dragon ship and the 6-toothed giant warship. When it passed through the sea, it was already an imposing and majestic object. It had 3 floors and a height of 6 zhang. It was decorated with red lacquer and was wrapped in iron armor. There was also a stable for horses. Unfortunately, Su Fengnian's ships could not withstand a few lashes. However, the Qingzhou Navy was even more unfortunate. This was because the one standing at the bow of the ship was Bailiang, His Royal Highness. Su Fengnian calmly said, "General Ning, go and get the halberd." Ning Amei, who had a gentle personality, revealed a rare evil grin. He turned around and went to the cabin to retrieve the iron halberd. He even carried the short halberd bag on his back. Lu Yangshu and the other two were naturally prepared to jump off the ship and fight. Ordinary soldiers really could not withstand the torment of 3 second-level experts. However, civilians did not fight with officials, and heroes did not violate the rules. There were some innate taboos. However, when they thought of who it was that taught Jianghu this bloody truth, the three immediately felt incomparably relaxed. Su Fengnian had Yu Yuwei return to the cabin first. He raised his head and saw the silk pants surnamed Zhao, who had been kicked by Lu Qiantang yesterday, standing on the 3rd floor of the Yellow Dragon ship with a group of disreputable friends. They were pointing and discussing. Were they pretending to give pointers? The Yellow Dragon ship gradually approached. They could clearly see that the giant paddle pole was ready. In front of the paddle pole and brandishing its claws, the brother-in-law surnamed Zhao held a white porcelain wine cup with 2 fingers. He looked quite confident and unrestrained. He shouted at Su Fengnian, "Foreigner, do you still dare to act rashly?" Su Fengnian smiled and replied, "Sure, I really want to weigh the weight of the Qingzhou ship. I'm just afraid that you guys are only pleasing to the eye but not useful." The man surnamed Zhao subconsciously glanced at the young master surnamed Zhao from the corner of his eye. This person of the same age had an elegant appearance, but his actions were low-key and restrained. Even when interacting with them, he did not put on any airs. He had an excellent reputation in Qingzhou. The son of the governor looked down from above and asked, "Do you dare to repeat what you said yesterday?" Su Fengnian knew that this was a trap that could be seen through at a glance, but he still smiled indifferently and said, "The name of the king of Jing'an? What harm is there in saying it? The son of the vassal king, Zhao Heng, is standing here. I can still beat him to the point that when he returns home, even Zhao Heng won't be able to recognize him." The man surnamed Zhao was overjoyed. He glanced at the refined young man beside him, who no one in Qingzhou dared to call himself a young master of a noble family in front of, and revealed a hint of gloominess that was hard to see. The fair-skinned young master with a jade-like complexion took a step forward. As soon as he stepped forward, the foppish Zhao immediately retreated. The young master looked straight at Su Fengnian and said calmly, "Don't regret it." Su Fengnian raised his hand. The 100 Phoenix Battalion soldiers on the 3 ships all came out of their cabins. They stood with crossbows in their hands, and the moment they unsheathed their standard Bailiang blades that were as clear as snow. As a result, it was the Qingzhou Navy that was in a difficult position. Was there really going to be a battle on the water today? The commander of the Phoenix Battalion, Yuan Meng, was even more fearless. He repeatedly made hand signals to supervise the battle. The Phoenix Battalion was originally the cream of the crop among Bailiang's light cavalry. They were among the best in horse battles, foot battles, and night battles. The boatman at the helm had long been controlled. The 3 ships instantly drew an arc, forming a triangle. Although the Bailiang army was not good at water battles, that was only in comparison to horse battles. What about the Qingzhou Navy? Back when the Bailiang cavalry surrounded Xianxia, the Navy soldiers on these 2 ships were still sucking on their mother's milk, right? Shishu had once chiseled a stone wall and hung 3 iron chains to block the river in an attempt to stop the navy that Bailiang had put together at the last minute. Who would have thought that the battle on the water would end before it even started? The natural defenses along the river were completely destroyed by the Bailiang army. Strictly speaking, the Bailiang army could be considered half of the ancestors of the Qingzhou Navy. Su Fengnian laughed mockingly and said, "Do you dare to fight?" Chapter 158. Chapter 1. Since the Spring God Lake had stopped burning after the Spring and Autumn War, could it be that the 3 merchant ships were going to give the Qingzhou Navy a taste of meat? The leader of the group of playboys on the Yellow Dragon ship frowned. He didn't need to think about the outcome of a naval battle where there was a great disparity in strength. However, once the battle started, given his sensitive identity, the repercussions would be too great. Even his father wouldn't dare to bear the consequences. The 3 Yellow Dragon ships had sailed to the vicinity of Mount Lao under the pretext of training on the water to show off. If the other party was an ordinary noble, not to mention the 4 giant battering poles, hooks, and plow darts placed around the ship, it would be enough to make them suffer. After smashing or overturning the other party's ship, they would be charged with the crime of salt and iron smuggling, which would become an untraceable case. Qingzhou was already dissatisfied with Wang Linquan of Mount Lao interfering in the salt and iron business. On one hand, they were helping Commander Zhao's son vent his anger. On the other hand, they could give Mount Lao a warning. Killing two birds with one stone, why not? However, when he saw the hundreds of people on the 3 ships carrying standard military knives, they were even armed with crossbows. Although the dynasty didn't encourage wanderers to travel with knives, it wasn't strictly prohibited. However, crossbows were not privately issued by the military. He wasn't blind. Behind the playboy on the other side stood a burly general wearing heavy armor and wielding a halberd. The dynasty had millions of soldiers, but the number of brave men who could use a halberd could be counted on one hand. The identity of the person he wanted to teach a lesson to was naturally revealed. Who could be personally protected by Bailiang's great halberd Ningame. He had long heard that Bailiang's His Royal Highness had left for the second time to travel, but he didn't expect to coincidentally bump into it today. His Royal Highness wasn't something that just anyone dared to impersonate. The descendants of vassals needed the imperial court's permission to leave the country, and there were even more rules and regulations when they left the country. Moreover, it was obvious that claiming to be the son of any vassal was safer than pretending to be the son of the Bailiang. If the son of a butcher stood casually in the spring and autumn 8 kingdoms and shouted that he was Bailiang's His Royal Highness, he would be swarmed by assassins. The young man, who was also from one of the top families in the dynasty, had a complicated expression. He muttered to himself, "This guy brought 100 Bailiang light cavalry, almost the same as my father's. What a show of extravagance!" As expected of the son of a vassal with a different surname. The position under one's but was different, and the thoughts in one's head were completely different. Different from the caution of the leader, the disciples of Qingzhou, including Zhao, were furious when they heard Su Fengnian's clamor. It had to be known that there were 2 things to rely on in a naval battle. One was to occupy the upper reaches and go with the flow, making it difficult for the enemy master to compete. The second was to use a large ship to crush a small one. The dynasty's navy had spent a lot of money to build 3 giant ships that were as tall as the city walls. The Emperor Yu of the Old East Yu, the Divine Phoenix of the Old West Chu, and the flagship of the Qingzhou Navy. Not to mention the Yellow Dragon Fortress ship, even the Green Dragon ship, which was already considered a big ship, would be smashed to pieces by the iron rod at the bow of the ship. The difference between the Yellow Dragon and the 3 giant ships was undoubtedly the difference between the merchant ship and the Yellow Dragon. Where did this guy get the courage to say, "Do you dare to fight?" How much courage did he have to eat to be able to do this? Other than the leader, there were 2 people with the most radical and impetuous personalities. Other than the leader, Zhao, whose father was a lieutenant, and Wei Wei, whose father was the head of the Qingzhou Navy. Wei Wei had always been secretly cursed by the people of Qingzhou as an evil dragon. Relying on his father's power, he liked to forcefully kidnap girls and take them to the lake to do whatever he wanted. After the deed, he would either bury them as corpses or strip them naked and force them off the ship. Most of the latter could not bear the humiliation and wanted to commit suicide by jumping into the water. The most outrageous thing about Wei Wei was his ability to draw a 3-stone bow. Once a girl fell into the water, she would be shot to death by his bow. His father was known as the Dragon King of Qingzhou. Wei Wei, this birdman, was illiterate. Normally, he would act like a hawk or a dog on the street. Whenever he saw a scholar dressed like a scholar, he would beat them up. He had learned 70 to 80% of his ruthlessness from his father. In his life, he admired Li Hanlin, one of the 4 evils of Liangzhou, the one who set up the beast cage. He often said that if he had the chance, he would definitely become sworn brothers with Li Hanlin. Wei Wei immediately flew into a rage. In his life, there were 2 things he hated the most: the refined scholar and the more domineering young master. The guy standing at the bow of the ship was complete. No matter how he looked at him, he did not find him pleasing to the eye. Daring to spout nonsense in his territory, he was tired of living. Turning his head, he angrily shouted at a distant servant, "Go get the bow for me." The servant hurriedly ran to get the large bow that was stained with blood. The 2 Yellow Dragon cruise ships had a total of 400 people on board. In the 5 elements, earth prevailed water, which was yellow in color. Therefore, the soldiers on board the ship wore yellow clothes and yellow hats. They were called Huang Tu Lang. Each Yellow Dragon cruise ship was equipped with 10 spears, hook axes, 32 crossbows, 3,300 arrows, and 40 armors, according to the military book, Controlling the Enemy on Water. Among the Huang Tu Lang, those who were good at fighting were given the title of Xiaomanzi. The Yellow Dragon cruise ship had more than a dozen Xiaomanzi. Moreover, the 2 Yellow Dragon cruise ships were fighting with the wind. No matter how you looked at it, they were far superior to the enemy's 100 crossbows. Victory was in their grasp. The several women on board the Yellow Dragon cruise ship were wearing the distinctive large-sleeved long skirt of aristocratic women. The large-sleeved skirt was first invented by Empress Zhao Ji in the imperial palace. Together with the phoenix coronet and other clothes, it was the common attire of the empress and the imperial concubines. In recent years, the imperial court had been lax in its governance, so the subordinates followed suit. The women on the cruise ship were wearing red, purple, pink, green, duck yellow large-sleeved skirt, just like a group of colorful butterflies and swallows. They were wearing luxurious clothes, so their mentality was slightly different from the young master brothers on the same ship. They did not have any strong hostility toward the man with the twin sabers. In their eyes, they only thought that he was a distinguished and elegant man. One saber was long, the other was short. The long saber was beautiful, the short saber was simple and unadorned. The style was completely different. Standing at the bow of the ship facing the 400 Qingzhou ship soldiers, he did not show the slightest bit of fear. Even more so, the man's graceful bearing was like a jade tree facing the wind. Let's not talk about whether he was an embroidered pillow or not. Just based on his bold attitude, it made their hearts palpitate. They did not care about the 2 armies confronting each other with swords drawn and bows bent. 2 of the bolder daughters of Qingzhou's powerful families had already quietly cast flirtatious glances. Su Fengnian did not actually care whether or not the Qingzhou navy could meet the enemy head-on. He was more concerned with observing the details of the Yellow Dragon ship. Whether or not the warships were mobilized in an orderly manner, whether or not the hooks and poles were cleaned and bright, whether or not the ship's boards and sails were wrapped in ox-leather armor, whether or not the ship's armor was complete. From this, one could tell that autumn was coming. The old Taoist priest Wei Shuyang stood by His Royal Highness's side to guard against a sneak attack. Su Fengnian turned his head and casually talked to Ning Amei about naval warfare, giving a concise evaluation of the Qingzhou navy. This General Wu Dian, one of the 4 fangs of Bailiang, was not familiar with naval warfare, but when he heard what His Royal Highness said, his expression was grave and a little surprised. His Highness was clearly an expert in naval warfare. He explained the pros and cons and spoke tirelessly. This was not something that could be discussed on paper with just a few glances at the white inscripture. General De Ji smiled slightly and bowed. As long as the enemy dares to fight, I can break the ship's hooks with one strike of my halberd, preventing them from getting close. As for archery, the Yellow Dragon is 108,000 li away from our Bailiang soldiers. I earnestly request your Highness to allow me to lead the troops to gain the upper hand by a show of strength. I must let the Qingzhou Navy experience what is called valiance in battle. Chapter 159. Su Fengnian shook his head, saying teasingly, General Ning, we agreed to a battle, whether we fight or not is still up to those people on the other side to decide. If you make the first move, His Royal Highness, whose reputation has always been terrible, isn't afraid. At most, Su Xiao will get into a heated argument with Grand Secretary Zhang and the other Grand Secretaries in the royal court, but be careful, you might not even be able to become a martial honor general. Look at that tower ship general over there who is at the same rank as you. He's so proud of himself, I reckon he'll get promoted and become rich if he helps out with this matter. General Ning is already suffering by following behind me. If you can't get promoted, then that's fine, but if you get demoted as well, my reputation will really be ruined in all 30 provinces. In the future, who will dare follow this heartless His Royal Highness around? The heavily armored and dignified Ning Ame roughly understood His Royal Highness' temperament. With a knowing laugh, he said, "That makes sense. It seems like tomorrow, I'll have to beg your Highness and Great General to give this general the title of Thousand Martial Ox General. It's not easy for me to leave home this time, so I have to give your Highness some face." Su Fengnian laughed loudly and said, "I just have to." When Bailiang's light cavalry faced the enemy with rapt attention, they would occasionally observe His Royal Highness and General Ning's expressions. When they saw how relaxed and carefree the two of them were, their heroic spirits also began to overflow. Bailiang's old subordinates could be said to be the most disliked group of people in Liang dynasty. The 300,000 unmatched armored cavalry stationed at the border between Liang and Beimang were helpless against this atmosphere that had persisted for more than 10 years. They followed His Royal Highness and General Ning, finally seizing the opportunity to leave Bailiang. Even though they lost quite a few brothers in the battle on the Rainy Path, once they entered Bailiang's army, who would be scared of dying on the battlefield? Later on, at Yingzhu's city gate, General Ning, with a swing of his halberd, knocked down that ignorant old general Gu Jiantong's old general. Later on, they heard General Ning say that His Royal Highness had personally said that if he was present, he would definitely hang that Eastern Forbidden City's deputy commandant on the city gate as an example to the public. If at that time the Phoenix Battalion's light cavalry were still half believing and half doubting, but after going through the gates of hell, His Royal Highness had personally rescued them, and hearing that he dared to fight today, they began to believe more than they doubted. Regardless of whether His Royal Highness was reckless or not, this kind of domineering behavior was, in the end, worthy of the Bailiang's royal banner. That day, His Royal Highness had moved like an ape in the rapids, especially the way he held the iron halberd with the word, bow, in his hand. The Phoenix Battalion had all seen it with their own eyes and remembered it in their hearts. The few light cavalry soldiers who had been rescued from the water by His Royal Highness had recently been jesting with their fellow soldiers, and their words were always somewhat arrogant. Su Fengnian saw a sturdy young man on the yellow dragon ship take a huge ox-horn bow and draw it to a full moon. It was clear that his arm strength was not ordinary. That arrow was pointed directly at him. Su Fengnian, holding Xiaodong in his right hand, narrowed his pair of extremely beautiful red phoenix eyes and said quietly, "I'm just waiting for you." On Mount Lao, Wang Linquan came to the study of his youngest daughter, Wang Chudong, to watch the battle together. Wang Dongxiang's snow study room was the tallest building on Mount Lao. Books were everywhere, scattered and disorderly, but she never had the maids tidy it up. The study room was a forbidden area, especially when she was writing poems. No one would disturb her. Every book was graded into different categories and given different nicknames. When she was bored, she would lie down in the pile of books on the floor and let the different categories of books fight each other. She would talk to herself and entertain herself, so she was never lonely. Therefore, the personal maids standing outside the study room could always hear such things as, "Ah, the classics have won over the art of war. I punish you all by not being able to read the 46 military books for half a day. Oh, the Western Shu poetry collection and the Southern Tang poetry collection are evenly matched. Not bad, not bad. I will reward the great generals who lead their respective armies for 3 days each." The maids were already accustomed to their young mistress's unconstrained thoughts and felt that they were lucky to have such a happy and carefree master. When their young mistress was bored of writing books, she would play polo with them. In particular, some of the maids had appeared in The First Snow in the East Wing. This was too magical. Scholars all over the world knew about them, so much so that many of Qingzhou's gentry came to marry a girl from the East Wing. Together with the old man who claimed to be a descendant of the East Wing, they were the two wonders of the literary world of Qingzhou. Wang Chudong stood on her tiptoes and looked at the confrontation of the boats on the lake. She asked worriedly, "Father, can we win?" In the end, the older the ginger, the spicier the ginger, Wang Linquan had a card up his sleeve. The Qingzhou Navy seems to have a lot of ships, but in reality, it's all for show. Qingzhou hasn't had any wars in the past 10 years, so this bunch of Huang Tulang is just putting on a show. His Highness' personal guards are different. They're 1 in 100, and they're proficient in horseback archery. 100 strong and valiant soldiers against 400 useless people who don't know how to fight. In the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, the Huang Tu Lang will throw away their armor. However, His Highness has to be wary of the political maneuvering in the imperial court and cannot defeat the enemy first. The Qingzhou Navy also does not dare to say that they are lawless. After His Highness has revealed his identity, they still dare to fight on the water. This is not a small matter where officials bully the people. It is a big taboo for the imperial court to cover it up. Now, it all depends on whether there are any discerning people in the Qingzhou Navy. If Wei Wei and the other scoundrels control the situation, they will most likely lose the water battle and then the imperial court. Once the Qingzhou Navy is defeated and this is exposed, even the prefecture magistrate will not be able to cover up Wei Dong's corruption over the years. At that time, this navy will change. Originally, the Qingzhou Navy was tightly controlled by Gu Jiantong's old subordinates. They have repeatedly questioned Father's salt and iron river transportation business. Father can take this opportunity to insert people from his direct line of command. Wang Chudong murmured, "The god of spring is 36,000 hectares, 100 armor breaks 400 armor." Wang Linquan quickly gathered his thoughts and did not talk about the politics in the imperial court. He smiled and praised, good poem, majestic aura." Wang Chudong glared, "How is this a poem? Your daughter is just randomly making it up." Wang Linquan shamelessly boasted, "My early winter relies on a horse to speak 10,000 words into a chapter. It is not a poem, but it is better than a poem." Wang Chudong was about to refute when she suddenly saw the wind and clouds change on the lake. She pointed to the river and raised her voice, "Look!" On the third floor of the ship, Wei Wei drew a large circle and then shot an arrow in a flash. The sharp arrow shot towards Su Fengnian. Earlier on, the great halberd Ningame had seen someone pull the bow, wanting to block this arrow for His Highness the heir. However, the old Taoist priest of Judami, Wei Shuyang, signaled with his eyes that there was no need to do anything. In the blink of an eye, Su Fengnian drew his saber. Everyone on the ship, as well as the 400 yellow-haired men, only saw a dazzling white light flashing in an arc. When they looked again, they saw that the astonishing arrow that had pierced through the air had been cut in half. They didn't know how, but half of the arrowhead was in that person's hand. Not giving Wei Wei, who was waiting for her opponent to die, any time to regain her senses, Su Fengnian lightly tossed the other half of the arrow and flicked it with his finger. The arrow's momentum was innumerable. This attack wasn't aimed at Wei Wei, but rather at the leading noble family's son. This young master had long retreated behind the scenes. It was obvious that he wanted to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Su Fengnian was determined not to let him have his way. Since he was fishing, how could he not fish for a big whale? This fellow was most likely a descendant of Prince Jinggan, Zhaoheng. Before entering Xiangfan City, he wanted to let Prince Jinggan know that back then, Su Fengnian didn't dare to make a sound after being whipped by Su Shao dozens of times with a horsewhip. Today, this heir apparent was going to personally beat up your son and see who was the real tiger father and dog son. That nobleman had an expert bodyguard by his side. He used his sleeve to block half of the arrow, but that nobleman was clearly startled. He retreated a few steps and accidentally bumped into the chest of a Qingzhou noble lady, provoking a particularly ear-piercing pout. Su Fengnian slowly withdrew his saber. He still had that extremely arrogant expression that deserved a beating. In a clear voice, he asked, "Do you dare to fight?" Ningame slammed the iron halberd in his hand against the deck of the ship, causing a loud bang. His appearance was originally that of a leopard with round eyes, a swallow jaw, and a tiger's beard. At this moment, he angrily glared at the yellow dragon ship. He was incomparably ferocious and valiant. He shouted, "Phoenix Battalion! Fight to the death!" Yuan Meng and the 100 Phoenix Battalion Light Cavalry immediately shouted in unison, "Fight to the death!" The sound of thunder rushed to the heavens. The people on the two opposite ships could not help but feel their hearts tremble. They looked at each other in dismay. They could see the deep fear in each other's eyes. The 400 men's hands and feet were trembling. They could no longer hold the weapons in their hands. Chapter 160. Chapter 2. Officials fight against officials. Have you ever seen the big shots throw away all pretenses and roll up their sleeves to fight in the government office? Don't they all talk about hiding a dagger in a smile and stabbing people in the back? This group of hedonistic daughters came to play this time, more to join in the fun, to support the one surnamed Zhao. They wanted to see with their own eyes the rare scene of the yellow dragon warship smashing a big ship. Who would have thought that this outsider who was on good terms with Wang Linquan was such a tough nut to crack? He brought along 100 soldiers and bodyguards without saying anything, and even dared to take the initiative to challenge. Oh my, the opponent of the challenge was not a group of family servants, but the 2 large ships of the Qingzhou Navy. In the eyes of the people of Qingzhou, the Yellow Dragon warship was already an invincible giant warship. It had always been praised as the main warship of the Qing Dragon Navy that no one could contend against. In these years, it had competed with the other navies in the dynasty, and its ranking was not low. Because of this, Wei Dong's official rank was not too high, but within the borders of Qingzhou, he dared to blow his beard and glare at the officials who were 1 or even several ranks higher than him. Even the prefecture overseers and county governors were very amiable to Wei Longwang, and fought to rope him in. If he did not have the special power of the Qingzhou Navy, Wei Dong would not be able to raise such a lawless son like Wei Wei. In the state, there was a beloved daughter who was an imperial censor in the capital who returned home. Unfortunately, she was raped by Wei Jiao and then shot to death. That imperial censor who did not have a high rank but was able to influence the public opinion was unable to obtain the innocence of his daughter. Wei Longwang only lost the right to command the giant warship, and Wei Wei, who caused the big trouble, was only grounded for half a year before he came out again. It was enough to see how Qingzhou, which was full of officials in the capital, advanced and retreated together with the independent Qing party in the imperial court. It was rumored that the unlucky Qing Lu imperial censor wrote a blood-sobbing poem before his death, ridiculing that the imperial censor had lost all his strength of character. One of the lines was even more heart-wrenching. I said that the imperial censor is not as good as a dog, even a dog's bark is as good as a rooster's crow. Su Fengnian once again pointed the spearhead at the son of the most prominent aristocratic family, in order to make the king of Jing and Zhao Heng refrain from shooting at the rat for fear of breaking the vases. The bigger the involvement, the bigger the fish that Su Fengnian could fish in troubled waters. The law that put heavy shackles on the vassal kings, to a prince with a different surname, Su Shao, the imprisonment was very small. Even the powerful prince of Guangling had to go to the Zhou overseer mansion 3 times in 10 days to draw up a report. If he did not reach the deadline, according to the law, he would be detained and sent to the court. The weak prince of Huainan, Zhaoying, had many young and strong children who could not get a name and could not get married. However, the king of Bailiang, who carried a blade to court, had not visited Liangzhou's Zhou overseer mansion once in more than 10 years. Every time Su Shao returned, it would always be the previous Zhou overseer, Yan Jieshi, who eagerly went to the prince's mansion to pay his respects. Presumably, Yan Jieshi, who defected from Bailiang, was stifled with resentment. No wonder after arriving in the capital he became the most fiercely critical and loyal minister of Bailiang's military. With his daughter married off to the prince Zhao Yanwu, Yan Jieshi now had the status of a relative. The outside world speculated that he would soon fill the 4th-ranked Lingyan Pavilion's Great Scholar position. The Palace Hall's Great Scholar position at the top of the Palace Hall's Great Scholar position was like a great pillar of the country, one of the 2 great empty titles of the several hundred-year-old dynasty, something that no one dared to hope for. If Zhang Julu took another step forward, he might have a chance of seizing this special honor and laurel. Only, with Grand Secretary Zhang's ability to endure patiently for 20 years, he most likely wouldn't let himself be roasted on a stove like his political enemy, Su Shao. Only, Su Fengnian seemed to have underestimated the courage and insight of Wei Wei, this group of Qingzhou hedonists who were used to being vicious and merciless. Wei Wei's arrow didn't do anything, and then when he heard Su Fengnian ask if he dared to fight, he was so angry that he wanted to die. He turned around and ordered the ship general who had always obeyed his orders, use the battering pole. The battering pole was a powerful weapon in naval warfare, especially in close-quarters battles between large warships. It was destined that one couldn't use the hook to overturn the ship. Skilled sailors would often smear a thick layer of medicinal paste on their sails to block fire and attack, ultimately relying on this battering pole to smash down. The battering pole was like a large mast, more than 10 zhang in length. On top of it was a giant rock. Below it was a mechanism. When the enemy ship approached, the battering pole would smash it to pieces. Su Fengnian turned around to look at Ning Amei and Wei Shuyang, saying with a light laugh, "To measure a navy's strength, we can look at how many times the battering pole is clumsily used. In my opinion, this Qingzhou navy can only use it twice at most. If they want to use it 3 times, they'll have to burn incense high. Compared to the Guangling navy, they are far inferior." While they were talking and laughing, the Qingzhou Yellow Dragon had already begun to prepare the battering pole. Under the command of the 2 generals on the ship, the helmsman and the Yellow Dragon responsible for battering the pole began to get busy under the command of Qiao Zhuosher. The men and women who were standing on the 3rd floor returned to the cabin. Wei Wei and a few fierce young masters whose hands were tainted with murder cases sat by the window to watch the battle. The young master who was scolded and beaten by Su Fengnian raised a cup of wine. He did not drink, but only continuously twirled the porcelain cup with his fingers. His face was as calm as water. He sat alone in front of the table, no one dared to approach him. This young master, who was usually known for his elegance and simplicity in Qingzhou, was like a coiled poisonous snake. The young ladies in silk and satin sleeves gathered together and whispered. Originally, there were 1 or 2 girls who leaned towards the Qingzhou Yellow Dragon, but unexpectedly, they were affected by the chatter of their companions. Their eyes were shining as they recounted the good things about the young master from other places. They talked about how heroic and elegant he was, how beautiful he had a pair of beautiful eyes, and how powerful he was when he wielded his blade. Those who were not firm in their stance immediately changed sides and could not wait to run out and cheer for the unknown white-robed young master. When the young ladies who were born in a rich family but lived a peaceful life gathered together, what they talked about the most was the interesting men they met. Apart from that outstanding young master, their family backgrounds were not inferior to Wei Wei and the others, so they naturally didn't need to care about their faces. Qingzhou, where interests were intertwined, was quite xenophobic. As a result, when Wei Wei shot the imperial censor's daughter to death, the Green Party in the court pinched their noses and helped clean up his mess. Moreover, Qingzhou's internal friction was very small. Therefore, no matter how rude and violent Wei Wei was, he could still be considered kind to the women on the ship. He didn't even mind being mocked by them about some embarrassing things. The common people said that he was an evil flood dragon on the river, but they were more than happy to tease him that he was not a dragon, but a worm. Wei Wei did not get angry and accepted it gladly. The Green Party being able to have its current status, able to compete for power with Grand Secretary Zhang's bloodline, Great General Gu's army, and various old and new noble factions, was inseparable from the blind unity of Qingzhou's rich and powerful young masters. This was the foundation of the Green Party, whose scholarship was not prominent and governance was more mediocre. Wei Dong understood this well, and so did the province overseer Huangfu Song. The old foxes in high positions in the court were even more unswerving. Otherwise, why would they try to push for the marriage between Princess Sui Zhu and Huangfu Song's eldest son, Huangfu Jie? Originally, there was no sign of anything happening, yet the Green Party's big shots were racking their brains to forcefully draw 2 lines. Bringing armored soldiers when traveling, who is this person? A young lady wearing a pair of pointed lotus root bow shoes asked in a low voice. This question had reached the crux of the matter. Chapter 161. Who else could it be? The Crown Prince of Prince Liang. The lady in yellow chuckled. She glanced at her fellow cabin mate who was in a daze and lowered her voice. In the past, I only heard that His Royal Highness was arrogant in Bailiang. Now that I've seen it, I truly believe it. If it was our prince who went to Bailiang, would he dare to be so arrogant in front of Su Zhugua's descendants? No way. Our king of Jing and can't compare to the king of Bailiang. Now the king of Bailiang is going to the capital to meet the emperor. I heard from my father that he is going to ask His Royal Highness for an official robe. The other vassal kings don't even have a chance to enter the capital. That Su Zhugua is more powerful. The lady with the oval-shaped face laughed. I heard that the king of Bailiang dotes on the women he fancies very much. Spending a lot of money to buy a smile is an understatement. When my second sister married to Bailiang, she sent me a letter saying that all the women in Liangzhou would be proud to be brought back to the palace by His Royal Highness. Look at Wei Chongzi, who only knows how to destroy flowers. We really can't compare. Can the king of Bailiang really be hereditary? The lady with small feet asked in surprise. Who said that a woman's virtue was if she had no talent? If she wanted to marry into a good family of equal social status, she would not be able to take care of her husband and children if she did not have talent. Even if the wives and concubines in the noble families fought, she would suffer. There was once a Yanji vice commentator who talked about the women of the world. She said that the women of northern Liang could rein in horses, the women of eastern Yu were graceful and talented, the women of western Chu were loyal, and the women of Qingzhou were the most attractive. This was not without reason. Qingzhou women could always gain a foothold in their husband's family after marrying out of the country. They could hold the position of the first wife and make the concubines suffer. Of course, this was inseparable from the power of the Green Party. The women of Qingzhou always had a naturally keen sense of the intrigues of the imperial court and the deceit of the Jianghu. The aristocratic families of other provinces who had ambitions for their official career naturally liked to marry a Qingzhou daughter-in-law to manage the household. It's hard to say. According to common sense, the imperial court is unwilling to admit that Bailiang can be overthrown. Otherwise, why does the law of vassal clans only mention that the king of Bailiang can be overthrown, but not the king of Bailiang with a different surname? Isn't it because they are worried that Bailiang is the Bailiang of the pillar state and not the Bailiang of the dynasty? The oval-faced socialite whose second sister was married to Bailiang was very passionate about the secrets of Bailiang's military and political affairs. This was considered a secret conversation in the boudoir. Whoever leaked it out would be breaking the rules of Qingzhou and would be seen as a traitor, implicating the entire family. She was not worried about this and could speak without restraint. She rested her chin on her hand and looked out the window, quietly waiting for the battle to heat up. In the imperial court, Grand Secretary Zhang, General Gu Zhentang, and especially that group of people who hate the pillar state to the extreme. They are led by a loyal old minister of West Chu, Sun Shiji. This old grand preceptor originally wanted to die, but when he thought about the fact that the pillar state still stands, he took up the position of an official. He clearly said that he only wanted to see the king of Bailiang's miserable end with his own eyes. As for our Qingzhou ancestors and the king of Jing and Hehe, I don't need to say more. Would they look on helplessly as the Bailiang was passed down for generations? Yanzi, then tell us about the Bailiang and his royal highness. You know a lot about this matter. The voluptuous young lady curiously asked her oval-faced close friend with a face full of expectation. She was the most excited among the group of orioles and swallows. When she saw Su Fengnian break an arrow with a blade, she would have cheered loudly if her companions hadn't held her back. In the past, because of her family and the culture of Qingzhou, she snorted disdainfully at the pillar state and the infamous Bailiang heir. Today, she saw with her own eyes His Highness standing proudly at the bow of the ship. She was completely bewitched. She only felt that she should marry Su Fengnian. The more domineering the children of Qingzhou were and the more she saw the insufferably arrogant children of Qingzhou, the more she felt that the Bailiang heir was superior. He even dared to provoke the heir of a vassal state, Zhao Sun, and threatened to beat the king of Jing until he couldn't recognize him. Wasn't that guy with the surname Su and the name Fengnian enough heroic spirit? All the men of Bailiang are scolding him, especially the group of young masters who would be considered insects in Qingzhou. They are even more reverent and jealous to the point that their teeth itch. Among the women, there are half praise and half blame. My second sister once saw the actions of the Bailiang heir from afar and felt that it was quite interesting. Second brother-in-law often quarreled with my sister about this matter, saying that my sister was possessed by a ghost. Do you know what ruthless words my second sister said to shut brother-in-law's mouth? She kept them in suspense and smiled brightly. Among the women of Qingzhou, she was famous for being witty and eccentric. Since she was young, she was very good at teasing Wei Wei and the others. What did she say? The group of young ladies asked in unison. My second sister said, "Husband, if you quarrel with me about this matter again, be careful that the next time I do boudoir, I will call His Royal Highness." She was the first to hold her belly and laugh. These words were really ruthless. The other women were also stunned at first, and then they all laughed until tears came out. They could leisurely and carefreely talk about boudoir and the ups and downs of being an official at the same time, but Wei Wei's group of young masters who were strung together by a thread had serious expressions. Earlier, when they wanted to use the baton pole to smash the boat, it was because they felt that the opponent was not important enough and treated it as a gathering on the lake to liven things up. Now, as long as they were not idiots, they could guess the identity of the opponent. It was the standard Baoyang blade that had once led a trend throughout the dynasty. That sentence of a battle to the death that shook one's soul. Wei Wei considered himself as the son of a noble family in Qingzhou and was proud of himself. He made a mistake and staked everything on one throw, and made another mistake after another. He ordered the Yellow Dragon ship to batten the pole to resist the enemy. He even dared to humiliate the daughter of an imperial censor in the capital to death, so he did not mind being absurd one more time. Did he really think that Wei Wei was an idiot in the bureaucracy? Regardless of the result of this battle, as long as he did not kill the heir of Baoyang, Wei Wei's reputation of defeating the Baoyang army would be spread all over the country. Even the imperial palace would hear a thing or two about it. Who would not give a thumbs up and praise Wei Wei for being loyal and righteous even though he did not study? That year, his father was implicated by him and was unable to command the giant ship Crimson Banner. His father had been regretting it all these years. Today's feat might be able to smoothly push his father, Dragon King Wei, to the highest position in Qingzhou. That white-robed heir of Baoyang with a blade was undoubtedly the best stepping stone. Different from the boorish Wei Wei, the heir of the noble family had a deeper thought and his face was gloomy. That person in the imperial palace had always liked to see the vassal kings fighting openly and secretly, otherwise there would not be the imperial clan law that two kings could not meet. This time, instead of saying that the fight with Su Fengnian was a grudge between the two heirs, it might as well be seen as the continuation of the fight between his father and Su Rentu, two enemies for 20 years. His father had been seeking Taoism and Buddhism for so many years. He vaguely remembered that when his father went to Mount Longhu to request for imperial edicts, he was rejected several times. His Majesty even did not care about his face and severely criticized his father. One of his younger brothers was even demoted to a commoner and sent to the inner circle of the high walls of Fengyang with 60 people. If it were not for the good words of a concubine from Qingzhou in the imperial palace, forget about going to Mount Longhu to burn incense, even his future as a hereditary prince would be a problem. Today's battle on the water, regardless of victory or defeat, what would happen to him and his father? His Majesty the Emperor's thoughts were profound. Since he ascended the throne, he was the best at balancing vassal kings and regions, civil officials and military generals, and parties. He really did not have the confidence to guess the Emperor's thoughts. Should he take advantage of the situation and behead Su Fengnian? As this shocking thought flashed through his mind, the heir of the king of Jing and finally lowered his head and drank a mouthful of wine to hide the strange expression on his face.